Water, it is the most powerful force on the face of this planet. It carves mountains in half. It splits continents apart. It feeds billions of mouths. It destroys entire civilizations in a single flood. And yet without it, not a single living thing on this earth would draw breath. Of all the forms water takes, the oceans, the glaciers, the underground reservoirs hidden deep beneath rock and soil, none is more important to the story of human life, human civilization, human ambition, and human tragedy than the river. Rivers are the veins of the earth. They carry life through the body of every continent. They pulse with the rhythm of seasons, swelling in spring, retreating in autumn, freezing in winter, and roaring back to life when the world warms again. They are ancient beyond measure, older than any kingdom or empire that ever stood along their banks. Some rivers have been flowing for tens of millions of years, their courses carved so deep into the planet's crust that nothing short of the collision of tectonic plates could ever reroute them. Others are young, geologically speaking, born only a few thousand years ago when the last great ice age retreated and meltwater carved fresh channels through newly exposed land. This is the story of the river. Not one river, not a single famous waterway. This is the story of all rivers everywhere, from the mightiest to the most modest, from the most celebrated to the most forgotten. This is the story of how rivers shaped the world we live in, how they created the civilizations we inherited, how they sustain the ecosystems we depend on, and how they continue, even now, to hold the future of life on this planet in their restless, ever-moving currents. Let us begin where all rivers begin, at the source. Every river starts somewhere. It might start as a tiny spring bubbling out of a crack in a mountainside. It might start as meltwater trickling off the edge of a glacier. It might start as a small pond in a highland bog where rainwater collects in a shallow depression and eventually finds a way downhill. This starting point is called the headwaters, and no matter how enormous a river eventually becomes, it always begins in a place so small, so humble that you could step across it without getting your feet wet. The Nile, the longest river on the planet, stretching over 6,650 kilometers from its source to the Mediterranean Sea, begins its journey in the highlands of East Africa, fed by streams that trickle down from mountains shrouded in cloud and mist. The source of the White Nile, one of the Nile's two main tributaries, is generally considered to be Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa. But even Lake Victoria is fed by smaller rivers and streams, and so the true origin of the Nile is a matter that explorers and geographers have debated for centuries. The search for the source of the Nile consumed the lives of European explorers in the 19th century and became one of the great geographical obsessions of the modern age. Men died in the pursuit, men lost their reputations. Men drove themselves to the brink of madness, wandering through equatorial Africa, hacking through jungle and navigating hostile terrain, all to answer a question that had haunted humanity since the time of the ancient Greeks. Where does the Nile begin? The answer, as with so many things involving rivers, turned out to be more complicated than anyone expected. Rivers do not begin at a single, clean, easily identifiable point. They begin as networks of small channels, each one feeding into the next, gradually merging and combining until the accumulated water is large enough to be called a river. The concept of a single source is in many ways a human invention, a need to pin a definitive starting point onto something that is, by its nature, diffuse and distributed. But rivers do have a direction. They flow downhill. This seems obvious, almost laughably simple, but it is one of the most important facts about rivers and one that explains almost everything about how they behave. Water is pulled by gravity. It seeks the lowest point. A river is nothing more than water finding the fastest, most efficient route from high ground to low ground, from mountain to sea, from elevation to ocean. The path it takes is determined by the landscape it encounters, the hardness of the rock, the slope of the terrain, the presence of obstacles, the history of previous flows that have already begun to carve channels into the earth. This is why rivers meander. A perfectly straight river is an extraordinarily rare thing in nature. Almost all rivers curve and bend, winding back and forth across their floodplains in sinuous, snake-like patterns. These curves are called meanders, and they form because of the way water interacts with the material it flows over. On the outside of a bend, the current is faster, and the water erodes the bank, cutting into it and carrying away sediment. On the inside of a bend, the current is slower, and sediment is deposited, building up the bank. Over time, this process causes the bend to grow more and more extreme, until the curve becomes so pronounced that the river eventually cuts through the narrow neck of land, separating two adjacent loops, creating a shortcut and leaving behind an isolated crescent-shaped body of water known as an oxbow lake. Oxbow lakes are found along the courses of meandering rivers all over the world. They are remnants of the river's former path, left behind like footprints in sand. Over time, they fill with sediment and vegetation and eventually disappear, becoming part of the floodplain. But while they exist, they serve as important habitats for wildlife, hosting populations of fish, amphibians, birds, and insects that thrive in the still, shallow waters. The process of meandering is just one example of how rivers are constantly reshaping the landscape. Rivers are among the most powerful erosive forces on Earth. Given enough time, a river can cut through solid rock, carving canyons hundreds of meters deep. The most famous example of this is the Grand Canyon, a chasm carved by the Colorado River over the course of millions of years. The canyon is over 440 kilometers long, up to 29 kilometers wide, and more than 1,800 meters deep at its deepest point. The layers of rock exposed in the canyon walls tell a geological story that stretches back nearly 2 billion years, revealing ancient seas, deserts, mountain ranges, and volcanic eruptions that shaped the landscape long before the river existed. But the Colorado River did not carve the Grand Canyon alone. The process was aided by countless tributary streams, by freeze-thaw cycles that cracked and loosened the rock, by wind and rain that wore away the exposed surfaces, and by the sheer weight of time. The canyon is a collaborative work of nature, a monument to the patient, relentless power of erosion. Rivers carry material as they flow. This material is called sediment, and it consists of everything from fine particles of clay and silt to grains of sand and even large boulders. The amount of sediment a river carries depends on several factors: the speed of the current, the volume of water, the type of rock and soil the river flows through, and the amount of rainfall in the catchment area. A fast-flowing mountain stream can carry large rocks and cobbles, tumbling them along the riverbed with tremendous force. A slow, wide river on a flat plain carries mainly fine silt and clay, suspended in the water like clouds of underwater dust. The sediment that rivers carry is not just debris. It is the raw material of new land. When a river slows down, as it does when it reaches flat ground, enters a lake, or empties into the sea, it drops its sediment. This process is called deposition, and it is responsible for some of the most fertile and densely populated landscapes on Earth. River deltas are formed at the mouths of rivers, where the current slows as it meets the ocean or a large body of water. The sediment that the river has carried, sometimes for thousands of kilometers, is deposited in fan-shaped or branching patterns, building up layers of rich, fertile soil. The Nile Delta, the Ganges Delta, the Mekong Delta, the Danube Delta, these are among the most productive agricultural regions on the planet, supporting millions upon millions of people. The Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, shared by Bangladesh and India, is the largest river delta in the world. It covers an area of approximately 100,000 square kilometers and is home to over 150 million people. The soil is so rich, so constantly renewed by annual floods depositing fresh layers of silt, that it supports multiple harvests per year. Rice, jute, tea, and countless other crops thrive in this lush, water-saturated landscape. But the delta is also one of the most vulnerable places on Earth. It sits barely above sea level, and as global sea levels rise, millions of people face the prospect of displacement. Cyclones regularly sweep in from the Bay of Bengal, bringing storm surges that flood vast areas and claim thousands of lives. The very qualities that make the delta so fertile, its flatness, its low elevation, its proximity to the sea, also make it perilously exposed to the forces of nature. deltas have played an outsized role in human history. The Nile Delta was the breadbasket of ancient Egypt, and before that, it was the cradle of one of the earliest and most sophisticated civilizations the world has ever known. The ancient Egyptians understood something fundamental about rivers that would take other cultures centuries to grasp. The annual flood was not a disaster, it was a gift. Each year, as the summer rains fell on the highlands of Ethiopia and East Africa, the Nile swelled and overflowed its banks, spreading a thin layer of nutrient-rich silt across the fields of the floodplain. When the waters receded, the soil was renewed, refreshed, made ready for another season of planting. The Egyptians built their entire agricultural system around this cycle, developing irrigation channels, water storage systems, and planting schedules that aligned with the rhythm of the river. The importance of the Nile flood was so great that the Egyptians developed sophisticated methods for predicting it. They used a device called a nilometer, a stone column or staircase built into the riverbank or on an island in the river to measure the height of the annual flood. Too little water meant drought and famine. Too much water meant destructive flooding that could wash away crops and homes. The ideal flood deposited just the right amount of water and silt, and the nilometer readings helped the authorities plan for the year ahead, adjusting taxes and food distribution based on the expected harvest. This relationship between rivers and agriculture is not unique to the Nile. It is, in fact, the foundation of civilization itself. The earliest human settlements, the first cities, the first written languages, the first systems of law and governance, all of these arose along the banks of rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus in South Asia, the Yellow River in East Asia, the Nile in North Africa, these are the cradles of civilization, the places where human beings first transitioned from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agriculture, and from settled agriculture to urban life. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow through modern-day Iraq, joining together near the city of Basra before emptying into the Persian Gulf. The land between these two rivers was known in ancient times as Mesopotamia, a Greek word meaning between the rivers. It was here, approximately 5,000 years ago, that the Sumerians developed one of the world's first writing systems, cuneiform, pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets to record transactions, laws, stories, and prayers. It was here that the first known legal code, the Code of Hammurabi, was carved into a stone stele and displayed for all to see. It was here that the first cities rose, Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, their mud brick walls and towering ziggurats standing as monuments to human ambition and ingenuity. None of this would have been possible without the rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates provided water for irrigation, allowing farmers to grow surplus crops that could feed not only themselves, but also the artisans, priests, soldiers, and administrators who made urban life possible. The rivers also provided transportation, allowing goods and people to move efficiently across the landscape. And they provided a source of clay, the primary building material for Mesopotamian cities, which was dug from the riverbanks and shaped into bricks that were dried in the sun or fired in kilns. But the rivers of Mesopotamia were not always benevolent. Unlike the relatively predictable Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates were prone to sudden, violent floods that could devastate entire communities. The timing and severity of the floods were unpredictable, and the Sumerians lived in constant awareness of the river's destructive potential. This awareness found expression in their mythology. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature, contains a flood narrative remarkably similar to the story of Noah's Ark in the Hebrew Bible. In the Sumerian version, the gods decide to destroy humanity with a great flood, and a single righteous man is warned in advance and builds a boat to save his family and a collection of animals. The parallels between these stories suggest that catastrophic river flooding was a shared experience among ancient cultures in this region, and that the memory of particularly devastating floods was preserved and transmitted through oral tradition long before it was written down. Rivers have always inspired stories. They are natural symbols of time, of change, of the passage from one state to another. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus is credited with the observation that you cannot step into the same river twice, because the water is always moving, always changing. The river you stepped into a moment ago is not the same river you step into now. This insight captures something profound about the nature of rivers and, by extension, about the nature of existence itself. Everything flows, everything changes. Nothing remains the same. In Hindu tradition, the Ganges is not merely a river. It is a goddess, Ganga, who descended from heaven to earth to purify the souls of the dead. The Ganges is considered the most sacred river in Hinduism, and millions of people bathe in its waters each year, believing that the act will wash away their sins and bring them closer to spiritual liberation. The city of Varanasi, which sits on the banks of the Ganges in northern India, is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world and is considered the holiest place in Hinduism. Pilgrims come from all over the subcontinent to bathe in the river, to pray on its ghats, the stone steps that lead down to the water, and to cremate their dead on funeral pyres along the riverbank, releasing the ashes into the sacred current. The spiritual significance of the Ganges has not protected it from pollution. The river is one of the most polluted waterways on Earth, contaminated by industrial waste, agricultural runoff, raw sewage, and the remains of cremated and uncremated bodies. Efforts to clean the Ganges have been ongoing for decades, but progress has been slow, hampered by inadequate infrastructure, rapid population growth, and the sheer scale of the problem. The Ganges Basin is home to over 400 million people, making it one of the most densely populated river basins in the world. The demands placed on the river for drinking water, irrigation, industry, and spiritual practice are enormous, and balancing these demands with the need to protect the river's ecological health is one of the great environmental challenges of our time. Pollution is not a problem unique to the Ganges. Rivers around the world have been degraded by human activity. The Rhine, which flows through 6 countries in Western Europe, was once so polluted that it was declared biologically dead in the 1970s. Industrial chemicals, heavy metals, and untreated sewage had turned the river into a toxic wasteland, devoid of fish and unfit for any use. A massive cleanup effort, coordinated by the nations that share the Rhine basin, has brought the river back from the brink. Today, salmon have returned to the Rhine for the first time in decades, and the river supports a thriving ecosystem. But the cleanup took decades of sustained effort and billions of dollars in investment, and the Rhine's recovery serves as both an inspiration and a warning. Rivers can be restored, but the damage caused by neglect and abuse is not easily undone. The Yangtze River in China tells a similar story. The longest river in Asia and the third longest in the world, the Yangtze stretches over 6,300 kilometers from its source on the Tibetan Plateau to its mouth at the East China Sea near Shanghai. The Yangtze Basin is home to over 400 million people and generates a significant portion of China's economic output. But decades of industrialization, urbanization, and intensive agriculture have taken a heavy toll on the river's health. Pollution, overfishing, dam construction, and habitat destruction have pushed several species to the brink of extinction, including the Yangtze River dolphin, also known as the beige, which was declared functionally extinct in 2006. The beige was one of only a handful of freshwater dolphin species in the world, and its loss is a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked human exploitation of river ecosystems. The construction of dams has been one of the most transformative and controversial human interventions in the life of rivers. Dams serve many purposes. They generate hydroelectric power, store water for irrigation and drinking, control floods, and create reservoirs for recreation and navigation. But they also fundamentally alter the natural flow of rivers, blocking the migration of fish, trapping sediment, changing water temperatures, and flooding vast areas of land. The ecological and social consequences of large dams have been the subject of intense debate for decades. The Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze is the largest hydroelectric power station in the world, generating over 22,000 megawatts of electricity. It was completed in 2006 after more than a decade of construction and at a cost of over $26 billion. The dam is a marvel of engineering, a concrete wall over 2,300 meters long and 185 meters high, holding back a reservoir that stretches over 600 kilometers upstream. But the construction of the dam required the relocation of more than 1,300,000 people, the flooding of hundreds of towns and villages, the inundation of countless archaeological sites, and the destruction of vast areas of natural habitat. The dam has also been blamed for increased seismic activity in the region, changes in downstream water flow that have affected agriculture and fisheries, and the accumulation of sediment behind the dam wall that reduces its storage capacity over time. The debate over dams is not just about engineering and economics. It is about values, about what we prioritize, what we are willing to sacrifice, and how we balance the needs of the present against the health of the future. In many parts of the world, the trend is shifting away from dam construction and toward dam removal. Old dams that no longer serve their original purpose or whose ecological costs outweigh their benefits are being dismantled, and the rivers they once blocked are being allowed to flow freely again. The results have been remarkable. Fish populations rebound, sediment flows resume, wetlands are restored, riparian forests regenerate, the river, given the chance, heals itself. We are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why rivers matter so much to human civilization, to the planet's ecosystems, to the future of life on Earth, we need to understand what a river actually is in the deepest, most fundamental sense. A river is part of the water cycle, the continuous movement of water between the Earth's surface and the atmosphere. The sun heats the surface of the oceans, lakes, and rivers, causing water to evaporate and rise into the atmosphere as vapor. This vapor cools and condenses, forming clouds which eventually release their moisture as precipitation, rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Some of this precipitation falls directly into rivers and lakes. Some of it seeps into the ground, replenishing underground aquifers, and some of it runs off the surface of the land, flowing downhill under the influence of gravity, collecting in small channels that merge into larger channels, which merge into streams, which merge into rivers. The river carries this water back to the ocean, where the cycle begins again. This cycle is ancient. It has been operating for billions of years, since the Earth first had liquid water on its surface, and rivers have been a part of it for almost as long. The oldest known river channels preserved in the geological record date back over 3 billion years, etched into rocks that formed when the Earth was young and the atmosphere was very different from what it is today. These ancient rivers flowed through a world without plants, without animals, without any life on land at all. They carved their channels through barren rock and empty sediment, carrying water from highlands to lowlands just as they do today, obeying the same laws of physics, following the same gravitational imperative. The arrival of plant life on land, roughly 450 million years ago, transformed the behavior of rivers. Before plants, rivers tended to be wide, shallow, and braided, spreading out across the landscape in multiple intertwined channels, constantly shifting course as floods rearranged the loose, unvegetated sediment. Plants changed everything. Their roots held the soil in place, stabilizing riverbanks and preventing the kind of lateral movement that characterized the rivers of the earlier, plantless world. Vegetation also slowed the flow of surface water, allowing it to infiltrate the soil rather than running off immediately. This increased groundwater recharge, which in turn provided a more steady, sustained flow of water to rivers between rainstorms. The result was rivers that were narrower, deeper, and more stable, rivers with well-defined channels and floodplains, rivers that meandered instead of braiding, rivers that we would recognize as rivers today. The evolution of trees, approximately 350 million years ago, further transformed river systems. Forests increased the capacity of the land to absorb and retain water, moderated temperatures, reduced erosion, and added organic matter to the soil, enriching the ecosystems that surrounded and depended on rivers. The relationship between forests and rivers is intimate and reciprocal. Forests protect rivers by filtering runoff, stabilizing banks, and providing shade that keeps water temperatures within the range needed by aquatic life. Rivers sustain forests by providing water and nutrients, carving floodplains where rich alluvial soils accumulate and creating the moist conditions that many tree species require. When forests are removed by logging, by fire, by conversion to agriculture, rivers suffer. Erosion increases, sediment loads rise, water temperatures climb. Nutrient levels change, the entire character of the river can be altered, sometimes irreversibly. This is why the protection of watersheds, the areas of land that drain into a river, is so critical to the health of the river itself. You cannot protect a river without protecting the land around it. The two are inseparable. Let us talk about the sheer diversity of rivers. No two rivers are alike. Each one is shaped by its unique combination of climate, geology, topography, vegetation, and human influence. A mountain river in the Himalayas, fed by glacial meltwater and cascading through narrow gorges at high speed, bears little resemblance to a slow, tea-colored river winding through the peat bogs of Scotland. A tropical river in the Congo Basin, flanked by dense rainforest and teeming with fish, crocodiles, and hippopotamuses, is a world apart from a seasonal desert river in the Sahara, which flows only during the brief rainy season and spends most of the year as a dry, sandy channel. The Congo River is one of the most remarkable rivers on Earth. It is the second longest river in Africa after the Nile and the deepest river in the world, with measured depths exceeding 220 meters in some places. The Congo carries the second largest volume of water of any river on the planet, surpassed only by the Amazon. Its basin covers an area of nearly 4 million square kilometers, encompassing the largest tropical rainforest outside of the Amazon and supporting an astonishing diversity of life. The Congo is home to over 700 species of fish, many of which are found nowhere else on Earth. Its rapids and waterfalls create barriers that isolate populations of aquatic organisms, driving speciation and producing an extraordinary level of biological uniqueness. The Amazon River, however, stands alone in terms of sheer scale and biological richness. The Amazon is the largest river in the world by volume of water discharged, roughly 209,000 cubic meters per second, a figure so large that it is difficult to comprehend. The Amazon accounts for approximately 20% of all the fresh water that flows into the world's oceans. Its basin covers nearly 7 million square kilometers, spanning 9 countries and encompassing the largest tropical rainforest on Earth. The Amazon rainforest is the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet, home to an estimated 10% of all species on Earth, including more than 2,000 species of fish, over 1,000 species of birds, and countless species of insects, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. The Amazon River is so wide in places that standing on one bank, you cannot see the other. During the rainy season, the river can widen to over 40 kilometers, flooding vast areas of forest and creating a unique aquatic ecosystem known as the Varzea, a seasonally flooded forest where trees stand in water for months at a time and fish swim among the branches, feeding on fruits and seeds that fall from above. This annual flooding is a crucial ecological process, distributing nutrients across the forest floor, creating breeding habitat for fish, and sustaining the livelihoods of millions of people who live along the river's banks. The Amazon is also the site of one of the most dramatic natural phenomena associated with rivers, the meeting of the waters. Near the city of Manaus, in the heart of the Brazilian rainforest, the dark, tea-colored waters of the Rio Negro meet the sandy, muddy waters of the Rio Solimões. For several kilometers, the two rivers flow side by side without mixing, their contrasting colors creating a striking visual boundary. This phenomenon occurs because the two rivers have different temperatures, speeds, and chemical compositions, which prevent them from blending together immediately. Eventually, the waters do mix, forming the main stem of the Amazon as it continues its journey eastward toward the Atlantic Ocean. Rivers are not merely channels of water. They are living ecosystems, complex communities of organisms that interact with each other and with their physical environment in intricate ways. A healthy river supports a web of life that extends far beyond the water itself. Insects hatch from the river and fly into the surrounding landscape, providing food for birds, bats, and spiders. Fish feed in the river and are caught by herons, otters, bears, and eagles. Trees along the riverbank drop leaves and branches into the water, providing food and habitat for aquatic invertebrates. Beavers build dams that create ponds and wetlands, slowing the flow of water and increasing habitat diversity. Salmon carry nutrients from the ocean deep into the interior of continents, nourishing forests and meadows with the remains of their bodies after they spawn and die. The salmon runs of the Pacific Northwest, the rivers that flow through the mountainous regions of western Canada and the coastal areas along the northern Pacific, are among the most awe-inspiring natural events on Earth. Each year, millions of salmon leave the ocean and swim upstream, fighting against the current, leaping over waterfalls, navigating rapids, and battling predators to reach the same freshwater streams where they were born. There they spawn, laying their eggs in gravel nests called redds, and then they die. Their bodies, rich in marine-derived nutrients, decompose and fertilize the surrounding ecosystem. Bears drag salmon carcasses into the forest, where they are consumed by insects, birds, and small mammals. The nutrients from the decaying fish enrich the soil, promoting the growth of trees and plants. Studies have shown that trees growing near salmon-bearing streams contain measurable amounts of marine-derived nitrogen, a direct chemical link between the ocean and the forest, mediated by the river and the salmon that swim in it. This interconnectedness is one of the defining features of river ecosystems. Rivers do not exist in isolation. They are connected to the land, to the atmosphere, to the ocean, and to the underground aquifers that feed them. They are corridors of life, linking habitats and enabling the movement of organisms, nutrients, and energy across the landscape. When we damage a river by polluting it, damming it, diverting its water, or destroying the habitat along its banks, the effects ripple outward, affecting ecosystems and communities far from the river itself. Let us consider the role of rivers in shaping the physical landscape. We have already discussed erosion and deposition, but the geomorphological power of rivers extends far beyond the carving of canyons and the building of deltas. Rivers create floodplains, flat, low-lying areas adjacent to the river channel that are periodically inundated during high water events. Floodplains are among the most fertile and ecologically productive landscapes on Earth. They are also among the most dangerous places for humans to live, a fact that has not prevented millions of people from doing so. The relationship between humans and floodplains is a study in contradiction. Floodplains are attractive places to settle because they offer flat land, fertile soil, easy access to water, and convenient transportation routes, but they flood. That is, after all, why they are called floodplains. And when they flood, the consequences for the people living on them can be catastrophic. The history of human civilization is punctuated by devastating river floods. The Yellow River in China, known as China's Sorrow, has been responsible for some of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. The river carries an enormous load of fine, yellow sediment, which gives it its name and its distinctive color. This sediment is deposited along the riverbed and banks, gradually raising the level of the river above the surrounding landscape. To prevent flooding, the people living along the Yellow River have built levees, raised embankments that contain the river within its channel. But as the river continues to deposit sediment, the levees must be raised higher and higher, until the river flows at a level well above the surrounding plain, contained only by the artificial walls on either side. When these levees fail, as they inevitably do during particularly severe floods, the results are catastrophic. The water rushes out across the plain with tremendous force, inundating vast areas and claiming enormous numbers of lives. The 1931 floods along the Yellow River and the Yangtze are considered among the deadliest natural disasters in human history. Estimates of the death toll range from 1 million to 4 million people, killed by drowning, starvation, and disease in the aftermath of the flooding. The scale of the catastrophe is almost beyond comprehension, a grim reminder of the power of rivers and the vulnerability of human communities that depend on them. But floods are not always disasters. As we discussed in the context of the Nile, regular, predictable flooding can be enormously beneficial, renewing soil fertility and sustaining agricultural systems that feed millions. The key distinction is between floods that occur within the natural rhythm of the river, the seasonal rise and fall that the ecosystem and the human communities along the river have adapted to, and floods that exceed the system's capacity to absorb them, whether because of unusual weather, poor land management, or the failure of flood control infrastructure. Modern societies have invested enormous resources in attempting to control rivers and prevent flooding. Levees, dams, channelization, diversions, and flood walls have been constructed along rivers around the world, often at great expense and with mixed results. The fundamental challenge of flood control is that rivers are dynamic systems. They change over time, responding to changes in climate, land use, and sediment supply. A flood control system designed for the conditions of one era may be inadequate for the conditions of another. And the act of controlling a river in one place often has unintended consequences in another. Levees that prevent flooding along one stretch of river can increase flood levels downstream, where the water that would have spread out across the floodplain is instead funneled through a narrow channel at higher velocity. Dams that trap sediment behind their walls deprive downstream areas of the sediment they need to maintain their deltas and coastlines, leading to land loss and coastal erosion. The lesson learned and relearned over centuries is that rivers cannot be fully controlled. They can be managed, guided, and accommodated, but they cannot be conquered. The most successful river management strategies are those that work with the river rather than against it, preserving floodplains as natural buffers, restoring wetlands that absorb and slow floodwaters, maintaining healthy riparian vegetation that stabilizes banks and filters runoff, and allowing rivers the room they need to move and change. Let us turn our attention to the role of rivers in transportation and trade. Before the invention of the railroad and the automobile, rivers were the highways of the world. They provided the most efficient, most reliable, and often the only practical means of moving people and goods over long distances. The history of commerce, exploration, and cultural exchange is intimately bound up with the history of rivers. The Danube, the second longest river in Europe after the Volga, has served as a highway of trade and culture for millennia. Rising in the Black Forest of Germany, the Danube flows eastward through 10 countries, more than any other river in the world, before emptying into the Black Sea. Along its course, the Danube passes through or borders some of the most historically significant cities in Europe: Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, Belgrade. For centuries, the river served as the frontier of the Roman Empire, separating the civilized world from the barbarian lands to the north. Roman legions patrolled its banks. Fortresses and watchtowers lined its shores. Trade goods, wine, olive oil, pottery, metals flowed up and down the river in flat-bottomed boats, connecting the heart of the empire to its distant provinces. After the fall of Rome, the Danube continued to serve as a corridor of trade, migration, and conflict. The Ottoman Empire, expanding into southeastern Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, used the Danube as a strategic highway, moving armies and supplies along its course as they advanced into the Balkans and eventually laid siege to Vienna itself. The river was both a barrier and a bridge, a natural obstacle that could be defended, and a navigable waterway that could be exploited by those who controlled it. The importance of rivers for transportation is not limited to large, navigable waterways. Smaller rivers have also played critical roles in the movement of goods, particularly in the timber industry. In many parts of the world, rivers were used to transport logs from remote forest areas to sawmills and markets downstream. Log drives in which thousands of cut logs were floated downstream on the spring flood were a common practice in northern Europe and other forested regions from the 17th century through the early 20th century. The practice was dangerous. Log jams could form, creating massive blockages that required skilled and courageous workers to dislodge, and it was ecologically destructive, scouring riverbeds, destroying fish habitat, and altering the natural flow of the river. But it was also extraordinarily efficient, allowing the transport of vast quantities of timber at minimal cost. The role of rivers in trade extended beyond the physical movement of goods. Rivers also served as sources of power, driving the water wheels that powered mills and factories. The water wheel is one of the oldest mechanical devices known to humanity, used for grinding grain, sawing wood, pumping water, and driving the bellows of forges and furnaces. The earliest known water wheels date back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, and the technology spread throughout Europe and Asia over the following centuries. By the medieval period, water wheels were a common feature of the European landscape, and rivers were dotted with mills that harnessed the energy of flowing water to perform work that would otherwise require enormous amounts of human or animal labor. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Europe in the late 18th century, was initially powered by water. The first factories, textile mills, iron works, and machine shops were located along rivers and streams, their machinery driven by water wheels or later by water turbines. The shift to steam power in the 19th century freed industry from its dependence on rivers, but the legacy of water-powered industrialization is still visible in the landscape. Many of the oldest industrial cities in Europe are located along rivers, their mills and factories clustered around the waterfalls and rapids that once provided them with power. Rivers have also played a central role in the exploration and mapping of the world. Explorers navigating unknown territories almost invariably followed rivers, which provided not only water and food, but also a navigable route through otherwise impenetrable landscapes. The exploration of the interior of Africa in the 19th century was largely a story of river exploration. The Niger, the Congo, the Zambezi, the Nile, each of these rivers served as a highway into the African interior, guiding explorers through dense forest, open savanna, and treacherous swampland. David Livingstone, the Scottish missionary and explorer, spent decades traveling through southern and central Africa, following rivers and mapping their courses. His exploration of the Zambezi River led him to one of the most spectacular natural features on Earth, Victoria Falls, which he named after the British Queen. The falls, known locally as Mosio Atunya, the smoke that thunders, are located on the border between modern-day Zambia and Zimbabwe. They are over 1,700 meters wide and over 100 meters high, and during the rainy season, the volume of water plunging over the edge is so great that the spray can be seen from more than 50 kilometers away. Victoria Falls is the largest curtain of falling water in the world, and it remains one of the most awe-inspiring natural wonders on the planet. Rivers are also borders. Throughout history, rivers have served as natural boundaries between territories, nations, and empires. The Rhine separated the Roman Empire from the Germanic tribes. The Danube marked the frontier of Roman and later Ottoman power. The Rio Grande separates two nations in the modern era. The Mekong flows through 6 countries in Southeast Asia, and disputes over its use have been a source of tension and conflict for decades. The use of rivers as borders is both practical and symbolic. A river is a visible, tangible line on the landscape, a feature that can be seen, mapped, and defended. But rivers are also dynamic, shifting their courses over time, which can create complications for the political boundaries they define. When a river changes its course, cutting a new channel, abandoning an old one, the border it defines may shift as well, potentially moving territory from one jurisdiction to another. This has been a source of legal and diplomatic disputes throughout history and continues to be so today. Let us now consider one of the most fascinating aspects of rivers, their role in shaping the cultures and identities of the people who live along them. Rivers are not just physical features, they are cultural landmarks, sources of identity, and objects of deep emotional attachment. People name themselves after rivers. They write songs and poems about rivers. They tell stories about rivers. They fight and die for control of rivers. The relationship between a community and its river is often one of the most defining features of that community's culture and history. The Thames, flowing through the heart of London, is inseparable from the identity of that city. The river has been the city's lifeline for over 2,000 years, providing water, transportation, food, and at times, a convenient place to dispose of waste. The history of London is in many ways the history of the Thames, from the Roman settlement of Londinium, built at the first point where the river could be bridged, to the bustling medieval port that made London one of the wealthiest cities in Europe, to the Great Stink of 1858, when the pollution of the river became so severe that Parliament was forced to act, leading to the construction of one of the most ambitious sewage systems in the world. The Seine in Paris, the Tiber in Rome, the Vltava in Prague, the Moskva in Moscow, each of these rivers is so intimately associated with its city that it is impossible to think of one without the other. The river is not just a geographical feature. It is a character in the city's story, a presence that shapes the city's layout, its architecture, its economy, and its culture. In many cultures, rivers are associated with the boundary between life and death. In Greek mythology, the river Styx separated the world of the living from the underworld. The souls of the dead were ferried across the Styx by Charon, the boatman, who demanded a coin as payment for the crossing. This is why in ancient Greece, the dead were buried with a coin placed under their tongue or on their eyes to ensure that they could pay the ferryman and reach the afterlife. The association of rivers with death and the afterlife is found in many cultures around the world. In Hindu tradition, as we have discussed, the Ganges is believed to carry the souls of the dead to heaven. In ancient Egyptian religion, the Nile was associated with the journey of the dead through the underworld, and funerary rituals often involved crossing the river from east to west, from the land of the living to the land of the dead, just as the sun crosses the sky from east to west each day. Rivers also feature prominently in creation myths and origin stories. The Bible describes 4 rivers flowing out of the Garden of Eden, watering the paradise that God created for humanity. The Tigris and Euphrates are named among them, anchoring the mythological landscape to real-world geography. In many indigenous traditions around the world, rivers are considered living beings, ancestors, spirits, or deities that must be respected and cared for. This worldview stands in sharp contrast to the Western tradition of viewing rivers as resources to be exploited, and it offers a powerful alternative framework for thinking about our relationship with the natural world. Let us return to the physical characteristics of rivers and explore some of the more extraordinary features that rivers create. Waterfalls are among the most dramatic of these features. A waterfall forms when a river flows over a sudden drop in elevation, typically caused by a layer of hard rock overlying a layer of softer rock. The softer rock erodes more quickly, creating an overhang that eventually collapses, causing the waterfall to retreat upstream over time. This process can produce spectacular gorges downstream of the falls, carved by the relentless action of falling water. Angel Falls in Venezuela is the tallest waterfall in the world, with a total height of 979 meters and an uninterrupted drop of 807 meters. The falls cascade off the edge of a flat-topped mountain known as a tepuy, a remnant of an ancient sandstone plateau that once covered much of the region. The tepuys of Venezuela are among the oldest geological formations on Earth, and their isolation has produced unique ecosystems found nowhere else, a lost world of endemic plants and animals perched high above the surrounding forest. Iguazu Falls, on the border between Argentina and Brazil, is one of the widest waterfall systems in the world, stretching over 2,700 meters across a horseshoe-shaped cliff. The falls consist of approximately 275 individual cascades, separated by rocky islands and lush tropical vegetation. The volume of water flowing over Iguazu varies dramatically with the seasons, from a trickle during the dry season to a thundering deluge during the rainy season, when up to 13,000 cubic meters of water per second plunge over the edge. Niagara Falls, straddling the border between Ontario, Canada, and the state on the other side, is perhaps the most famous waterfall in the world, not because of its height. It is only about 50 meters tall, but because of the enormous volume of water that flows over it and because of its accessibility. Millions of people visit Niagara Falls each year, making it one of the most visited natural attractions on Earth. The falls have also been harnessed for hydroelectric power, and the Niagara Power Stations were among the first large-scale hydroelectric installations in the world, pioneering the technology that would eventually bring electricity to millions of homes and businesses. Waterfalls are not permanent features. They are, geologically speaking, temporary stages in the ongoing evolution of a river's course. Over time, the waterfall erodes the rock over which it flows, retreating upstream and eventually flattening out into a series of rapids or a gentle slope. The Niagara Falls have been retreating upstream at a rate of approximately 1 meter per year for thousands of years, and if left unchecked, they would eventually erode all the way back to Lake Erie, draining the lake and eliminating the falls entirely. Human intervention, including the diversion of water for hydroelectric power and the reinforcement of the rock at the brink of the falls, has slowed this process, but it has not stopped it. In geological terms, Niagara Falls is living on borrowed time. Rivers also create caves and underground channels. In areas where the bedrock is composed of soluble rock, limestone, dolomite, gypsum, water can dissolve the rock over time, creating networks of underground passages, chambers, and caverns. These karst landscapes, as they are known, are found on every continent and contain some of the most spectacular natural formations on Earth. Stalactites and stalagmites, underground rivers and lakes, vast chambers that could hold cathedrals, and passages that extend for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. The longest known cave system in the world, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, was carved by the action of water dissolving limestone over millions of years. The system contains over 660 kilometers of surveyed passageways, and new passages are still being discovered. Underground rivers flow through the cave, supporting a unique ecosystem of organisms adapted to life in total darkness, blind fish, blind crayfish, and a host of invertebrates that have evolved in the absence of light. Let us now discuss the creatures that live in rivers. Freshwater ecosystems, rivers, lakes, wetlands, and underground waters cover less than 1% of the Earth's surface, yet they support approximately 10% of all known animal species, including over half of all known fish species. This extraordinary concentration of biodiversity in such a small area makes freshwater ecosystems among the most ecologically significant and the most threatened habitats on the planet. Rivers support an astonishing diversity of fish. The Amazon basin alone is home to over 3,000 species of freshwater fish, more than any other river system on Earth. These include the piranha, the arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, capable of growing over 2 meters long, the electric eel, which can generate shocks of up to 860 volts, and the peacock bass, a prized game fish that can weigh over 12 kilograms. The diversity of fish in the Amazon is so great that new species are still being discovered every year. But rivers are not just home to fish. They support a vast array of other organisms, from microscopic algae and bacteria to large mammals and reptiles. Crocodilians, crocodiles, alligators, caimans, and gharials are found in rivers on every tropical continent. The Nile crocodile, one of the largest living reptiles, can grow to over 5 meters in length and is a formidable predator, capable of taking down large prey including zebras and wildebeest at river crossings. The gharial, a critically endangered crocodilian found in the rivers of the Indian subcontinent, has a long, narrow snout adapted for catching fish, and it is one of the most distinctive and unusual-looking reptiles on Earth. Freshwater turtles are another important group of river-dwelling reptiles. The Yangtze giant softshell turtle, once found in rivers and lakes in China and Vietnam, is the most critically endangered turtle on Earth. As of recent counts, only a handful of individuals are known to survive, and the species is on the brink of extinction. The loss of this species would represent not just the disappearance of a single animal, but the extinction of an entire lineage that has existed for millions of years. Freshwater mussels, often overlooked and underappreciated, are among the most important organisms in river ecosystems. These bivalve mollusks filter water as they feed, removing suspended particles, bacteria, and algae from the water column and improving water clarity and quality. A single freshwater mussel can filter up to 40 liters of water per day, and large populations of mussels can significantly improve the health of the rivers they inhabit. But freshwater mussels are also among the most endangered groups of organisms in the world. Habitat destruction, pollution, dam construction, and the introduction of invasive species have decimated mussel populations in rivers around the globe. In some regions, more than 70% of native freshwater mussel species are considered threatened or endangered. Insects are another crucial component of river ecosystems. Mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies, dragonflies, and many other insect groups spend the larval stages of their lives in rivers, feeding on algae, detritus, and other organisms before emerging as winged adults to mate and reproduce. These aquatic insects are a vital food source for fish, birds, and other predators, and their presence and abundance are often used as indicators of water quality. A river that supports a diverse community of aquatic insects is generally a healthy river. A river that does not is cause for concern. The concept of using biological indicators to assess the health of rivers is one of the most important developments in modern environmental science. Rather than relying solely on chemical measurements of water quality, levels of dissolved oxygen, concentrations of pollutants, pH, ecologists can assess the health of a river by examining the organisms that live in it. If sensitive species, those that require clean, well-oxygenated water, are present, the river is likely in good condition. If only tolerant species, those that can survive in degraded conditions, are found, the river is probably impaired. This approach, known as biomonitoring, provides a holistic assessment of river health that chemical testing alone cannot achieve. Let us shift our focus to the relationship between rivers and climate. Rivers both influence and are influenced by the climate in which they exist. In tropical regions, rivers tend to carry large volumes of water year-round, sustained by heavy, consistent rainfall. In arid regions, rivers may flow only seasonally or intermittently, depending on rainfall patterns. In polar and subpolar regions, rivers may be frozen for much of the year, their flow restricted to a brief summer thaw. Climate change is altering the behavior of rivers around the world. Rising temperatures are accelerating the melting of glaciers, which feed many of the world's major rivers. In the short term, this can increase river flows, but in the long term, as glaciers shrink and eventually disappear, the rivers they feed will lose a critical source of water, particularly during the dry season when glacial meltwater is most important. The rivers of the Himalayas, the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, the Mekong, are all fed, at least in part, by glacial melt, and the projected decline in Himalayan glaciers over the coming decades has profound implications for the hundreds of millions of people who depend on these rivers for water, food, and livelihoods. Changes in precipitation patterns, more rain in some areas, less in others, and a shift toward more intense but less frequent rainfall events are also affecting rivers. More intense rainfall can increase the frequency and severity of floods, while longer dry periods can reduce river flows and increase the risk of drought. These changes are not uniform across the globe. Some regions are becoming wetter, while others are becoming drier, and the impacts on rivers and the communities that depend on them vary accordingly. Rising sea levels, driven by the thermal expansion of ocean water and the melting of ice sheets, threaten river deltas and coastal areas. As sea levels rise, salt water intrudes further upstream into rivers, contaminating freshwater supplies and threatening agriculture. Low-lying deltas, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, the Mekong, the Nile, are particularly vulnerable, and the potential displacement of millions of people from these areas is one of the most serious humanitarian challenges associated with climate change. Now, let us explore some of the most unusual and extraordinary rivers on the planet, rivers that defy expectations and challenge our understanding of what a river can be. The Okavango River in southern Africa is one of the most unusual rivers in the world. Instead of flowing to the sea, the Okavango empties into the Kalahari Desert, forming a vast inland delta, the Okavango Delta, that covers an area of up to 22,000 square kilometers during the annual flood. The delta is a paradise of biodiversity, supporting large populations of elephants, hippos, crocodiles, lions, leopards, wild dogs, and hundreds of species of birds. The Okavango Delta is one of the most important wildlife habitats in Africa and has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The phenomenon of a river flowing into a desert and simply disappearing, its water absorbed by the sand, evaporated by the sun, or taken up by vegetation, is more common than you might think. These endorheic rivers, as they are called, exist on every continent. They flow into landlocked basins with no outlet to the sea, and their water is lost to evaporation. The Jordan River, one of the most historically and religiously significant rivers in the world, flows into the Dead Sea, a hypersaline lake with no outlet. The water that enters the Dead Sea evaporates, leaving behind an ever-increasing concentration of salt and minerals. The Dead Sea, incidentally, is the lowest point on the Earth's land surface, sitting at approximately 430 meters below sea level. The Jordan River, which feeds it, is relatively small, more a stream than a river by most standards, but its cultural and religious significance is enormous. It is mentioned numerous times in the Bible, and it is the site where, according to Christian tradition, Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. For centuries, pilgrims have traveled to the Jordan to be baptized in its waters, and the river remains a powerful symbol of spiritual renewal and transformation. Another extraordinary river is the Caño Cristales in Colombia, often called the River of Five Colors or the Liquid Rainbow. For a few months each year between the wet and dry seasons, the riverbed explodes in a kaleidoscope of colors: red, yellow, green, blue, and black, caused by the seasonal blooming of aquatic plants, particularly a species of river weed called Macarnia clavigera. The red coloration is especially vivid, giving the river a surreal, almost otherworldly appearance. Caño Cristales is located in a remote area of Colombia, and its unique beauty has made it a growing tourist attraction, though access is carefully managed to protect the fragile ecosystem. The Rio Tinto in Spain is another river with an unusual appearance. Its waters are a deep, rusty red, stained by the high concentrations of iron and other heavy metals that leach from the surrounding rocks. The river flows through an area that has been mined for copper, silver, gold, and other metals for over 5,000 years, since the time of the ancient Phoenicians and Romans. The extreme acidity of the water, with a pH as low as 2 in some places, supports a unique community of extremophile organisms, bacteria and algae that have adapted to thrive in conditions that would kill most other forms of life. Scientists have studied the Rio Tinto as a possible analog for conditions on Mars, where similar mineral-rich, acidic water may once have existed. Let us return to the theme of rivers and human civilization and consider the role of rivers in warfare. Rivers have been strategically important in military history for as long as wars have been fought. They serve as natural defensive barriers, supply routes, lines of communication, and in many cases, the objectives of military campaigns. Control of a river can mean control of an entire region, its agriculture, its trade, its transportation, and its water supply. The crossing of a river in the face of enemy opposition is one of the most difficult operations in warfare. The attacking force must cross an open, exposed area, the river itself, while under fire from defenders positioned on the opposite bank. Military history is filled with famous river crossings, from Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC, a symbolic act that marked the point of no return in his march on Rome, to the Allied crossings of the Rhine in 1945, which marked the final push into the heart of the Third Reich during the Second World War. The Rubicon crossing deserves special attention, not because it was a particularly difficult military operation. The Rubicon is a small, shallow river in northeastern Italy, but because of its immense symbolic significance. Under Roman law, a general was forbidden from leading his army across the Rubicon, which marked the boundary between the Roman province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. By crossing the Rubicon with his legions, Caesar committed an act of treason, defying the authority of the Roman Senate and effectively declaring civil war. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" has entered the language as a metaphor for taking an irreversible step, making a decision from which there is no turning back. Rivers have also been used as weapons of war. The deliberate flooding of rivers to destroy enemy forces or impede their advance has been practiced by numerous armies throughout history. One of the most devastating examples occurred during the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1938, when Chinese forces deliberately breached the dikes of the Yellow River in an attempt to halt the advance of Japanese troops. The resulting flood inundated an area of over 50,000 square kilometers, killing an estimated 500,000 to 900,000 civilians and displacing millions more. The flood succeeded in delaying the Japanese advance, but the cost in human lives was staggering. Rivers have shaped the outcomes of battles and the fates of empires. The Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC saw Alexander the Great cross a rain-swollen tributary of the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan, surprising the forces of the Indian king Porus and winning a decisive victory that extended the reach of the Macedonian Empire to the eastern edge of the known world. The battle demonstrated both the strategic importance of rivers and the audacity required to overcome them. The rivers of Europe have been contested throughout history. The Rhine, the Danube, the Volga, the Don, these rivers have been the scenes of countless battles and have served as the frontiers of empires, the boundaries of nations, and the lines along which armies have advanced and retreated. Let us close this first part of our documentary with a reflection on the future of rivers. The rivers of the world face unprecedented threats. Climate change, pollution, dam construction, water extraction, deforestation, and urbanization are all taking their toll on the health and vitality of the planet's waterways. Freshwater species are declining faster than terrestrial or marine species, and freshwater ecosystems are among the most degraded habitats on Earth. But there is also reason for hope. Around the world, communities, governments, and organizations are working to protect and restore rivers. Rivers that were once declared dead are being brought back to life. Dams that blocked the passage of fish and disrupted natural flow regimes are being removed. Wetlands that were drained for agriculture are being restored. Indigenous communities are reclaiming their traditional rights to manage and protect the rivers that their ancestors have depended on for thousands of years. In New Zealand, the Wanganui River was granted legal personhood in 2017, recognizing the river as a living entity with rights and interests that must be protected. This groundbreaking legal decision reflected the worldview of the Maori people, who have long regarded the river as an ancestor, a living being that is inseparable from the people who live along its banks. The decision has inspired similar initiatives around the world, as communities seek new legal and cultural frameworks for protecting the rivers that sustain them. In India, the Ganges and the Yamuna were briefly granted the status of living entities by a court ruling, though the decision was later overturned. In Bangladesh, all rivers were granted legal rights in 2019. In Ecuador, the Constitution recognizes the rights of nature, including rivers, to exist, flourish, and be restored. These developments represent a fundamental shift in how we think about rivers, from viewing them as resources to be exploited to recognizing them as living systems that deserve protection and respect. The science of river restoration is advancing rapidly. Ecologists and engineers are developing new techniques for restoring natural flow regimes, rebuilding riparian habitats, removing pollutants, and reintroducing native species. The results are often dramatic. Rivers that had been channelized and straightened are being allowed to meander again. Floodplains that had been disconnected from their rivers by levees are being reconnected. Wetlands that had been drained are being re-flooded. And as these restoration efforts take hold, the rivers are responding, recovering their ecological health with a speed and vigor that surprises even the scientists who study them. But restoration alone is not enough. We must also address the root causes of river degradation, the pollution, the over-extraction, the land use changes, and the climate disruption that are pushing rivers to the breaking point. This requires political will, economic investment, scientific understanding, and perhaps most importantly, a change in the way we think about rivers. We must stop taking rivers for granted. We must stop treating them as infinite resources that can absorb any amount of pollution and yield any amount of water. We must recognize that the health of our rivers is inextricably linked to the health of our societies, our economies, and our planet. Rivers have been flowing since long before humans walked the earth, and they will continue to flow long after we are gone. But the rivers of the future will be shaped by the decisions we make today. Whether they will be healthy, vibrant, life-sustaining waterways or degraded, polluted, lifeless channels depends on us. The choice is ours. This is the story of the river, a story that is still being written, a story that is as old as the earth itself and as urgent as tomorrow's headlines. In the second part of this documentary, we will continue our exploration, diving deeper into the science, the history, the culture, and the ecology of rivers. We will visit rivers on every continent, meet the people who depend on them, and examine the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The river never stops flowing, and neither does our story. Stay with us, there is so much more to tell. The natural world is full of wonders, but few are as endlessly fascinating as the river. Consider, for a moment, the sheer volume of water that the world's rivers move every day. The combined discharge of all the rivers on Earth, the total amount of fresh water they deliver to the oceans, is approximately 1,107,000 cubic meters per second. That is over 34,900 cubic kilometers of water per year. To put that in perspective, that is enough water to fill Lake Geneva more than 400 times over, every year. This vast flow of water is not evenly distributed. A handful of the world's largest rivers account for a disproportionate share of the total discharge. The Amazon alone accounts for roughly 20%. Add the Congo, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, the Orinoco, and the Yangtze, and you have accounted for nearly half of all the fresh water that flows into the world's oceans. Meanwhile, thousands of smaller rivers, creeks, and streams contribute the rest, each one carrying its own unique cargo of water, sediment, nutrients, and life. The speed at which a river flows varies enormously depending on the gradient of the terrain, the volume of water, and the roughness of the channel. A steep mountain stream might flow at several meters per second, tumbling over rocks and boulders in a whitewater rush. A large, low-gradient river on a flat plain might flow at a fraction of a meter per second, its water barely seeming to move at all. The fastest recorded river flow was measured during a flood on the Passaic River, where velocities exceeded 6 meters per second, fast enough to sweep a person off their feet and carry them away in an instant. River velocity is not uniform across the channel. The water near the surface and in the center of the channel tends to flow faster than the water near the banks and the bottom, where friction with the channel bed slows the flow. This variation in velocity creates complex patterns of turbulence, eddies, whirlpools, and standing waves that mix the water and transport sediment, nutrients, and organisms throughout the water column. The temperature of river water also varies, influenced by the climate, the altitude, the time of year, and the source of the water. Glacial rivers are cold, often just a few degrees above freezing, even in summer. Tropical rivers can be quite warm, with temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius. Temperature affects everything in a river ecosystem: the metabolic rates of organisms, the solubility of oxygen and other gases, the growth rates of algae and aquatic plants, and the distribution of fish and invertebrates. Cold water fish like trout and salmon require well-oxygenated water below about 20 degrees Celsius, while warm water fish like catfish and bass can tolerate higher temperatures. Climate change is warming rivers in many parts of the world, pushing cold water species out of their historical ranges and creating conditions that favor warm water species, invasive species, and harmful algal blooms. The chemistry of river water is equally variable. Some rivers are clear, their water nearly as transparent as glass. Others are turbid, loaded with suspended sediment that reduces visibility to just a few centimeters. Some rivers are acidic, their waters stained brown by dissolved organic acids leached from peat bogs and decaying vegetation. Others are alkaline, their chemistry influenced by the limestone or chalk bedrock over which they flow. The pH, hardness, alkalinity, nutrient content, and dissolved oxygen levels of a river all influence the types of organisms that can live in it, and changes in these chemical parameters, whether caused by pollution, land use change, or climate shifts, can have profound effects on the river's ecological community. One of the most critical chemical parameters in a river is the level of dissolved oxygen. Fish and other aquatic organisms need oxygen to breathe, and they obtain it from the water. The amount of oxygen dissolved in river water depends on the temperature of the water. Cold water holds more oxygen than warm water. The speed of the current, fast-flowing water absorbs more oxygen from the atmosphere than slow-moving water, and the balance between oxygen-producing processes, photosynthesis by algae and aquatic plants, and oxygen-consuming processes, respiration by organisms and decomposition of organic matter. When oxygen levels drop too low, a condition known as hypoxia, fish and other sensitive organisms die. Mass fish kills caused by low dissolved oxygen are a distressingly common occurrence in polluted or degraded rivers, and they serve as a stark warning of the consequences of environmental neglect. Let us take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary adaptations that organisms have evolved to live in rivers. Life in a river is fundamentally different from life in a lake, a pond, or the ocean. The defining characteristic of a river is its current, the constant, unidirectional flow of water from source to mouth. Everything that lives in a river must deal with this current, either by resisting it, exploiting it, or avoiding it. Many river-dwelling organisms have evolved streamlined body shapes that reduce drag and allow them to hold their position in the current. Trout, for example, have torpedo-shaped bodies and powerful tail fins that allow them to maintain their position in fast-flowing water, facing upstream and waiting for food to be carried to them by the current. The larvae of certain caddisfly species build cases from small stones and silk, weighting themselves down to prevent the current from washing them away. Some mayfly larvae have flattened bodies that allow them to cling to the smooth surfaces of rocks, presenting a minimal profile to the current. Other organisms exploit the current to their advantage. Filter-feeding organisms, such as blackfly larvae and freshwater mussels, position themselves in the current and use specialized structures to capture food particles carried by the flowing water. Net-spinning caddisfly larvae construct silk nets in the current, straining out organic particles and small organisms in much the same way that a spider's web captures flying insects. The current also serves as a means of dispersal. Many aquatic insects drift downstream as larvae, colonizing new habitats and reducing competition for resources. Some species have evolved behaviors that compensate for this downstream drift. Adult females fly upstream to lay their eggs, ensuring that the next generation starts at the beginning of the river and drifts down to the areas where conditions are suitable for growth and development. The concept of the river continuum is a foundational idea in river ecology. It describes how the physical and biological characteristics of a river change systematically from its headwaters to its mouth. In the headwaters, the river is narrow, cold, and shaded by overhanging trees. The primary source of energy is organic matter that falls into the water from the surrounding forest, leaves, twigs, insects, and other terrestrial inputs. The organisms that dominate in these headwater reaches are shredders, invertebrates that feed on coarse organic matter, breaking it down into smaller particles. As the river widens and the canopy opens up, more sunlight reaches the water's surface, promoting the growth of algae and aquatic plants. Grazers, organisms that feed on algae, become more important. Further downstream, the river becomes wider and deeper, and the water carries a heavy load of fine organic particles. Collectors, organisms that filter or gather fine particles from the water column or the riverbed, dominate. In the lower reaches of the river, where the water is slow, deep, and often turbid, the ecosystem is sustained largely by organic matter transported from upstream. This model, known as the river continuum concept, was proposed in 1980 and has been one of the most influential frameworks in freshwater ecology. It provides a way to understand how river ecosystems function as integrated systems, with each part connected to and dependent on the others. It also highlights the importance of longitudinal connectivity, the uninterrupted connection from headwaters to mouth, for the health of the river as a whole. When this connectivity is disrupted by dams, diversions, or other barriers, the functioning of the entire system is affected. Rivers are also connected laterally to their floodplains, their riparian zones, and the underground aquifers that feed them. The flood pulse concept, another influential framework in river ecology, emphasizes the importance of periodic flooding in maintaining the health and productivity of river floodplain systems. Regular flooding connects the river to its floodplain, allowing water, sediment, nutrients, and organisms to move between the two. Fish use the floodplain as spawning and nursery habitat. Aquatic plants and invertebrates colonize the temporarily inundated areas, providing food for fish and other organisms. The floodplain, in turn, serves as a natural buffer, absorbing excess water during floods and releasing it slowly during dry periods, moderating the river's flow regime and reducing the severity of both floods and droughts. When humans disconnect rivers from their floodplains by building levees, channelizing the river, or draining wetlands, the ecological consequences are severe. Fish lose spawning habitat, nutrient cycling is disrupted. The natural flood buffering capacity of the landscape is reduced, making floods more severe and droughts more acute. The restoration of river floodplain connectivity is now recognized as one of the most important strategies for improving river health and building resilience to climate change. Let us discuss a fascinating topic that connects rivers to the ocean: estuaries. An estuary is the area where a river meets the sea, where fresh water and salt water mix. Estuaries are among the most productive and ecologically important habitats on Earth. The mixing of fresh and salt water creates a unique chemical environment that supports a rich and diverse community of organisms, many of which are found only in estuaries. Estuaries serve as nurseries for many commercially important fish and shellfish species. The nutrient-rich waters of estuaries support the growth of phytoplankton, which forms the base of the food web that sustains fish, crabs, shrimp, oysters, and other organisms. Many species that spend their adult lives in the ocean or in freshwater migrate through estuaries at some point in their life cycle, using them as feeding grounds, breeding areas, or transitional habitats. The ecological importance of estuaries has not protected them from human exploitation. Estuaries are often located at the sites of major cities and ports, and they have been subjected to extensive dredging, filling, pollution, and habitat destruction. Many of the world's great estuaries have lost much of their original wetland area to development, and the ecological consequences have been severe. The loss of estuarine wetlands reduces the capacity of the coast to absorb wave energy and storm surges, increasing the vulnerability of coastal communities to flooding and erosion. The restoration of estuarine habitats is a growing priority in many parts of the world. Projects to restore tidal wetlands, reintroduce native vegetation, remove barriers to fish migration, and reduced pollution inputs are underway in estuaries on every continent. The results are encouraging. Restored estuaries can recover their ecological function relatively quickly, providing habitat for wildlife, improving water quality, and increasing the resilience of coastal communities to storms and sea level rise. We have covered a remarkable amount of ground in this first part of our documentary, and yet we have barely scratched the surface. The story of rivers is as deep and as wide as the rivers themselves, and there is always more to discover, more to learn, and more to wonder at. In the second part of this documentary, we will continue our exploration, venturing into new territories and examining new aspects of the relationship between rivers and the world they sustain. We will explore the role of rivers in the development of art, music, and literature. We will examine the engineering marvels that humans have built to harness, divert, and control rivers. We will investigate the cutting-edge science that is revealing new insights into how rivers function and how they are changing. We will meet the people who live along rivers, whose lives and livelihoods are intimately connected to the water that flows past their doors. And we will confront the difficult questions that the future of rivers presents, questions about sustainability, justice, and the kind of world we want to leave to future generations. The river flows on. It has been flowing since the beginning of time, and it will continue to flow long after we are gone. But the river we leave behind will be shaped by the choices we make today. Let us make those choices wisely. We will return with part 2. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let us begin this second part with a subject that reveals just how deeply rivers are embedded in the human imagination, the role of rivers in art, music, and literature. Rivers have inspired creative expression for as long as human beings have possessed the capacity to create. The earliest known works of visual art, cave paintings dating back tens of thousands of years, depict scenes of hunting and daily life. And while rivers are not always explicitly shown, the animals that populate these paintings, bison, deer, horses, fish, are creatures whose lives were intimately connected to rivers and the water they provided. As human societies developed more sophisticated forms of artistic expression, rivers became central subjects in painting, poetry, music, and storytelling. In Chinese art, rivers and mountains have been the dominant subjects of landscape painting for over 1,000 years. The tradition of shan shui painting, literally mountain water painting, emerged during the Tang Dynasty and reached its peak during the Song Dynasty, roughly 1,000 years ago. In this tradition, the river is not merely a scenic element. It is a philosophical symbol representing the flow of time, the movement of the Tao, and the dynamic balance between opposing forces, between the solid permanence of the mountain and the fluid impermanence of the water. The greatest shan shui paintings are not attempts to depict a specific landscape. They are meditations on the nature of existence itself, and the river is their central metaphor. In European painting, rivers became important subjects during the Renaissance and the subsequent development of landscape painting as a genre. The Dutch masters of the 17th century, painters like Jacob van Ruysdael and Meindert Habema, depicted rivers and canals as integral features of the Dutch landscape, reflecting the profound importance of water management in a country where much of the land lies below sea level. The French Impressionists of the 19th century were drawn to rivers for different reasons: the play of light on water, the reflections of sky and foliage, the shimmering, ever-changing surface that seemed to embody the Impressionist ideal of capturing a fleeting moment in time. Claude Monet's paintings of the Seine, with their luminous reflections and soft, dissolving forms, are among the most beloved works of art in the Western tradition. Music, rivers have inspired compositions across every genre and tradition. Perhaps the most famous piece of river-inspired music is Bedřich Smetana's Vltava, the second movement of his symphonic poem cycle Ma Vlast, My Homeland. Composed in 1874, Vltava traces the course of the Vltava River from its twin springs in the Bohemian forest, through the Czech countryside, past castles and villages, through the rapids of the St. John's Falls, and into the city of Prague. The music begins with a delicate flute melody representing the bubbling springs, builds gradually as the river gathers strength, and culminates in a majestic, sweeping theme that evokes the grandeur of the river as it flows through the heart of the Czech capital. The piece is a masterwork of musical storytelling, and it captures something essential about the way rivers grow and change as they journey from source to mouth. Johann Strauss II composed The Blue Danube, one of the most recognizable pieces of music ever written, in 1867. The waltz, with its graceful, flowing melody, became an unofficial anthem of Vienna and a symbol of the cultural elegance of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Danube itself is not blue, it is more often a muddy brown or gray-green, but the idealized image of the Blue Danube has persisted in popular imagination, a testament to the power of art to reshape our perception of the natural world. In literature, rivers have served as settings, symbols, and structural devices in countless works. Mark Twain's novels set along the Mississippi, works that are among the most important in the literary canon, use the river as both a physical setting and a metaphorical landscape, a place where freedom and danger coexist, where social conventions dissolve, and where the characters confront fundamental questions about identity, morality, and justice. The Mississippi in Twain's work is not merely a body of water. It is a living presence, a character in its own right, shaping the destinies of everyone who encounters it. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, published in 1899, uses a journey up the Congo River as a metaphor for a descent into the darkest regions of the human psyche. The river in Conrad's novella is a pathway into the unknown, a corridor leading from the familiar world of European civilization into a realm of moral ambiguity, psychological extremity, and existential horror. The Congo River in Conrad's hands becomes a symbol of the journey into the self, a journey from which there may be no return. The Indian epic tradition is saturated with river imagery. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana, two of the greatest works of literature in human history, are filled with references to rivers as sacred spaces, as sites of pilgrimage, as boundaries between kingdoms, and as symbols of purity, fertility, and divine grace. The river Sarasvati, mentioned frequently in the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, is associated with the goddess of knowledge and wisdom. Whether the Sarasvati was a real river that dried up thousands of years ago or a purely mythological creation has been the subject of scholarly debate for centuries, and recent geological and archaeological research has suggested that a major river did indeed flow through northwestern India in ancient times, its course now buried beneath the sands of the Thar Desert. Rivers appear in the literature and oral traditions of virtually every culture on Earth. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia tell stories of the rainbow serpent, a powerful creator being that shaped the landscape by moving across the land, carving rivers and valleys as it traveled. These stories are not merely myths. They encode deep knowledge of the landscape, the water cycle, and the ecological relationships that sustain life in one of the driest continents on Earth. They represent tens of thousands of years of accumulated observation and understanding, transmitted from generation to generation through storytelling, song, and ceremony. Let us move now from the cultural to the engineering dimension of rivers and examine some of the most remarkable structures that human beings have built to harness, divert, and control the flow of water. The history of hydraulic engineering, the science and art of managing water, is as old as civilization itself. The earliest known irrigation systems date back to approximately 6000 BC in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, where farmers dug channels to divert water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to their fields. These simple ditches evolved over time into increasingly complex networks of canals, reservoirs, and distribution systems that allowed agriculture to flourish in a region where rainfall alone was insufficient to sustain crops. The ancient Egyptians developed their own sophisticated system of basin irrigation, using the natural flood cycle of the Nile to fill large, flat basins with water and silt. After the floodwaters receded, crops were planted in the rich, moist soil. This system required careful management and coordination, and it was one of the factors that drove the development of centralized government in ancient Egypt. The pharaoh was, among other things, the manager of the Nile, the individual responsible for ensuring that the river's bounty was distributed fairly and that the irrigation infrastructure was maintained. The Romans were perhaps the greatest hydraulic engineers of the ancient world. They built aqueducts, elevated channels that carried water from distant springs and rivers to cities and towns that were marvels of precision and durability. The Pont du Gard, a Roman aqueduct bridge in southern France, stands nearly 50 meters high and stretches over 270 meters across the valley of the Garden River. Built in the 1st century AD, it carried water over 50 kilometers from a spring near the town of Uzes to the city of Nimes. The aqueduct functioned for over 400 years, and the bridge itself still stands today, a testament to the engineering skill of its builders. The Romans also built extensive networks of sewers and drains to manage stormwater and sewage in their cities. The Cloaca Maxima in Rome, originally constructed in the 6th century BC, was one of the world's first sewage systems, channeling waste from the city's public baths, latrines, and streets into the Tiber River. The system was so well built that parts of it are still in use today, more than 2,500 years after its construction. Canal building is another form of hydraulic engineering that has profoundly shaped the human relationship with rivers. Canals are artificial waterways, dug by human hands, that connect rivers, lakes, and seas, enabling the transportation of goods and people across landscapes that would otherwise be impassable by water. The Grand Canal of China, begun in the 5th century BC and extended and improved over the following centuries, is the longest canal in the world, stretching over 1,776 kilometers from Beijing in the north to Hangzhou in the south. The canal connected the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, the two great rivers of China, creating a transportation network that facilitated trade, communication, and political integration across a vast and diverse empire. The Grand Canal was one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world, and it played a crucial role in the economic and political unification of China. In Europe, the canal-building era reached its peak in the 18th and 19th centuries, when thousands of kilometers of canals were dug to connect rivers, ports, and industrial centers. The canal network of England, built during the Industrial Revolution, transformed the economy by providing a cheap and efficient means of transporting raw materials and finished goods. Coal from the mines of the Midlands could be shipped by canal to the factories of Manchester and Birmingham, and manufactured goods could be sent to the ports of Liverpool and London for export around the world. The canals were eventually superseded by the railways, which were faster and more flexible, but the canal network remains a visible feature of the English landscape, and many of the old canals have been restored and repurposed for leisure and tourism. The Suez Canal, completed in 1869, and the Panama Canal, completed in 1914, are two of the most important canals ever built. The Suez Canal connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, eliminating the need for ships to sail around the entire continent of Africa. The Panama Canal connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, cutting through the narrow isthmus that joins North and South America. Both canals transformed global trade by dramatically reducing shipping distances and travel times, and both were feats of engineering that pushed the limits of human capability. The construction of the Panama Canal, in particular, was one of the most challenging engineering projects ever undertaken, requiring the excavation of millions of cubic meters of rock and earth, the construction of massive locks to raise and lower ships between different water levels, and the management of enormous logistical and public health challenges, including the deadly threat of malaria and yellow fever. Let us now turn to one of the most important and contentious issues in the modern relationship between humans and rivers, water rights and the politics of water. Water is life. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal biological fact. Without water, no organism can survive. And in many parts of the world, the supply of fresh water is limited, variable, and increasingly under stress. Rivers are the primary source of fresh water for billions of people, and as populations grow, economies develop, and climates change, the competition for river water is intensifying. The allocation of river water, who gets to use it, how much they can take, and under what conditions, is one of the most complex and politically sensitive issues in resource management. When a river flows through or along the border of multiple countries, the question of how to share its water can become a source of diplomatic tension and, in some cases, outright conflict. The Nile is a prime example. The river flows through 11 countries, from its sources in the highlands of Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda, through the vast wetlands of South Sudan, the deserts of Sudan, and the farmlands of Egypt, before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. Egypt, which is almost entirely dependent on the Nile for its water supply, has historically claimed the largest share of the river's flow, based on treaties signed during the colonial era. But upstream countries, particularly Ethiopia, have challenged these claims, arguing that they have the right to develop their own water resources for irrigation, hydroelectric power, and economic development. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, currently under construction on the Blue Nile near the Ethiopian-Sudanese border, has been a major source of tension between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. When completed, the dam will be the largest hydroelectric power station in Africa, generating over 6,000 megawatts of electricity. But Egypt fears that the filling of the dam's massive reservoir will reduce the flow of the Nile downstream, threatening the water supply that sustains its agriculture, its industry, and its population of over 100 million people. Negotiations over the dam have been ongoing for years, and while all parties have expressed a desire for a peaceful resolution, the stakes are enormous and the outcome remains uncertain. Similar disputes exist along rivers around the world. The Indus River, shared by India and Pakistan, has been the subject of a water-sharing treaty, the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960, that has been described as one of the most successful international water agreements in history. But the treaty is increasingly strained by population growth, climate change, and the construction of new dams and irrigation projects on both sides of the border. The Mekong River, shared by China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, is another flashpoint. China has built a series of large dams on the upper Mekong, and downstream countries have accused China of manipulating river flows to serve its own interests, with devastating consequences for agriculture, fisheries, and ecosystems in the lower basin. The politics of water are not limited to international disputes. Within countries, conflicts over river water between upstream and downstream users, between agricultural and urban interests, between environmental advocates and economic developers, are common and often bitter. The allocation of water in arid and semi-arid regions is particularly contentious, as the demand for water frequently exceeds the available supply. The concept of water as a human right has gained increasing recognition in recent decades. In 2010, the United Nations General Assembly explicitly recognized the right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation as a human right essential to the full enjoyment of life and all human rights. This recognition has important implications for river management, as it establishes a baseline requirement that the water needs of all people must be met, regardless of their economic status or political power. But the right to water is meaningless without the physical infrastructure and institutional capacity to deliver it. In many parts of the world, millions of people lack access to safe drinking water, not because the water does not exist, but because the systems needed to capture, treat, and distribute it are inadequate. Rivers flow through some of the poorest communities on Earth, and yet the people living along their banks may not have access to clean water because the river is polluted, the infrastructure is lacking, or the water has been diverted to serve other interests. Let us now explore one of the most mysterious and least understood aspects of rivers: underground rivers. Beneath the surface of the earth, hidden from view, vast quantities of water flow through networks of caves, tunnels, and porous rock formations. These underground rivers are fed by surface water that seeps into the ground through cracks, sinkholes, and permeable soils, and they can travel for hundreds of kilometers before emerging at the surface as springs or seeping into the ocean through submarine discharges. The longest known underground river is the Puerto Princesa subterranean river on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. This extraordinary waterway flows for over 8 kilometers through a limestone cave system, passing beneath towering stalactites and stalagmites, through vast chambers adorned with crystalline formations, and past colonies of bats and swiftlets that roost in the darkness. The river is navigable by small boats for much of its length, and it has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in recognition of its geological and ecological significance. In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, a vast network of underground rivers known as cenotes flows through the limestone bedrock. Cenotes are sinkholes formed when the roof of an underground cave collapses, exposing the water below. The Maya civilization, which flourished in this region for thousands of years, regarded cenotes as sacred places, portals to the underworld, gateways to the realm of the gods. Archaeological excavations of cenotes have yielded a wealth of artifacts, including pottery, jade ornaments, gold objects, and human remains, evidence of the ritual offerings and sacrifices that the Maya made to appease the deities they believed dwelt beneath the water. The cenote system of the Yucatan is one of the most extensive underwater cave networks in the world, with over 1,600 kilometers of surveyed passages. Divers continue to explore and map the system, discovering new connections and passages with each expedition. The water in the cenotes is remarkably clear, filtered through the porous limestone, and the underwater landscapes they reveal are among the most hauntingly beautiful environments on Earth: submerged cathedrals of stone, decorated with formations that took millions of years to grow, illuminated by shafts of sunlight that penetrate the clear water like spotlights on a stage. Underground rivers play a crucial role in the water cycle, feeding springs and wells that provide drinking water for millions of people. Karst aquifers, underground water systems in limestone regions, supply water to approximately 25% of the world's population. But these systems are also vulnerable to contamination, because pollutants that enter the ground can travel quickly through the cracks and channels in the rock, reaching the water supply without the natural filtration that occurs in other types of aquifer. Protecting underground rivers and the karst systems that contain them is essential for safeguarding the water supplies of hundreds of millions of people. Now let us consider something truly extraordinary: rivers that exist not on Earth but on other worlds in our solar system. Mars, the red planet, was once a world of rivers. Orbital images taken by spacecraft reveal vast networks of channels etched into the Martian surface, their branching patterns unmistakably similar to river networks on Earth. These channels, some of which are hundreds of kilometers long and several kilometers wide, were carved by flowing water billions of years ago, when Mars had a thicker atmosphere and warmer temperatures that allowed liquid water to exist on the surface. The discovery of these ancient river channels was one of the most exciting findings of planetary exploration, because it implied that Mars once had conditions that might have been suitable for life. The Martian rivers are long gone, their water lost to space as the planet's atmosphere thinned and its surface cooled. But the evidence of their existence is preserved in the landscape, frozen in stone for billions of years, waiting to be discovered by the robotic explorers that humanity has sent to investigate. Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, has rivers too, but they are not rivers of water. Titan's surface is so cold, approximately -179 degrees Celsius, that water ice is as hard as rock. Instead, Titan's rivers flow with liquid methane and ethane, hydrocarbons that exist as gases on Earth but are liquids at Titan's frigid temperatures. Images from the Cassini spacecraft and the Huygens probe, which landed on Titan's surface in 2005, reveal river channels, lakes, and even seas of liquid hydrocarbons, creating a landscape that is eerily reminiscent of Earth and yet profoundly alien. The existence of rivers on other worlds, whether of water, methane, or some other liquid, reminds us that the processes that shape rivers are universal. Gravity pulls liquids downhill. Flowing liquids erode the surfaces they travel over. Sediment is transported and deposited. Channels are carved, deepened, and widened. These processes operate wherever the conditions are right, regardless of the specific liquid or the specific world. Rivers are not unique to Earth. They are a fundamental feature of planetary geology, a natural consequence of the physics of fluids and the force of gravity. Let us return to Earth and examine a remarkable natural phenomenon associated with rivers, the tidal bore. A tidal bore is a wave that travels up a river against the direction of the current, driven by the incoming tide. Tidal bores occur in rivers with funnel-shaped estuaries and large tidal ranges, where the incoming tide is forced into an increasingly narrow channel, causing the water to pile up into a wave that surges upstream. Tidal bores can be small, barely noticeable ripples, or they can be powerful, dangerous waves several meters high. The largest and most famous tidal bore in the world is the Silver Dragon, which occurs on the Qiantang River in China near the city of Hangzhou. During the autumn equinox, when the tidal range is at its greatest, the bore can reach heights of over 9 meters, traveling upstream at speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour. The Silver Dragon has been observed and documented for over 2,000 years, and it draws enormous crowds of spectators each year who gather along the riverbanks to watch the wave pass. The bore has also claimed many lives over the centuries, as spectators and fishermen have been caught off guard by the power and speed of the wave. Tidal bores occur on rivers around the world, including the Severn in England, the Seine in France, the Ganges in India, and the Amazon in Brazil. The Pororoca, as the Amazon bore is known, is one of the longest tidal bores in the world, traveling up to 800 kilometers inland from the river's mouth. Surfers have ridden the Pororoca for distances of over 12 kilometers, making it one of the most extreme and unusual surfing experiences on the planet. The existence of tidal bores reminds us that rivers are not isolated systems. They are connected to the oceans, influenced by tides, lunar cycles, and the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun. The boundary between river and ocean is not a hard line but a dynamic, ever-shifting zone of interaction, where fresh water and salt water meet, mix, and negotiate for space. Let us now explore the relationship between rivers and human health, a topic that is both critically important and deeply sobering. Throughout history, rivers have been both sources of life and vectors of death. Clean river water sustains health, but contaminated river water spreads disease. Before the development of modern water treatment and sanitation systems, waterborne diseases were among the leading causes of death in human populations. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and a host of other illnesses were transmitted through water contaminated with human waste, and rivers, which served simultaneously as water supplies and sewage disposal systems, were primary vectors of transmission. The cholera pandemics of the 19th century were directly linked to river contamination. In London, the physician John Snow famously traced a cholera outbreak in 1854 to a contaminated water pump in the Soho district, establishing a direct link between polluted water and the disease. Snow's work laid the foundation for modern epidemiology and public health, and it led directly to the development of water treatment and sewage systems that have saved countless millions of lives. Today, waterborne diseases remain a major public health challenge in many parts of the world. The World Health Organization estimates that contaminated water causes over 500,000 deaths from diarrheal disease each year, the majority of them among children under the age of 5. In many developing countries, rivers continue to serve as both water supplies and waste disposal systems, and the lack of adequate water treatment and sanitation infrastructure means that millions of people are exposed to dangerous pathogens every day. Schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia, is a parasitic disease transmitted by freshwater snails that live in rivers and lakes. The disease affects over 200 million people worldwide, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, and it causes chronic illness, organ damage, and in severe cases, death. The parasite's life cycle depends on freshwater snails as intermediate hosts, and people become infected when they wade, swim, or bathe in water inhabited by infected snails. The construction of dams and irrigation systems can increase the risk of schistosomiasis by creating new habitat for the snails, and the disease has expanded its range in many areas where water development projects have altered the natural flow of rivers. Malaria, while not directly a waterborne disease, is closely associated with rivers because the mosquitoes that transmit the malaria parasite breed in standing water, including the pools and marshes found along the margins of rivers. The relationship between rivers and malaria has influenced human settlement patterns for thousands of years, with communities in malaria-prone areas often avoiding low-lying, marshy riverbanks in favor of higher, drier ground. The chemical pollution of rivers poses a different but equally serious threat to human health. Industrial chemicals, heavy metals, pesticides, pharmaceutical residues, and other toxic substances enter rivers through industrial discharge, agricultural runoff, and urban wastewater. Many of these substances are persistent, they do not break down easily in the environment, and they can accumulate in the food chain, concentrating in the tissues of fish and other organisms that are then consumed by humans. Mercury contamination is a particularly insidious problem. Mercury is released into the environment by coal-fired power plants, artisanal gold mining, industrial processes, and natural geological sources. In waterways, bacteria convert mercury into methylmercury, a highly toxic organic compound that accumulates in the tissues of fish and shellfish. People who consume large quantities of contaminated fish can suffer neurological damage, kidney failure, and develop mental problems, particularly in children and unborn babies. The Minamata disaster in Japan, which came to worldwide attention in the 1950s and 60s, was caused by the discharge of methylmercury from a chemical factory into Minamata Bay. The mercury accumulated in the local fish, and thousands of people who ate the fish suffered severe mercury poisoning, with symptoms including numbness, muscle weakness, narrowing of the field of vision, and in extreme cases, insanity and death. The Minamata disaster remains one of the most horrifying examples of industrial river pollution in history, and it led to fundamental changes in the regulation of industrial discharge into waterways. Let us shift our attention to a more hopeful topic, the role of rivers in recreation and the human spirit. Rivers are places of joy. They are places where people swim, fish, boat, kayak, canoe, raft, and simply sit and watch the water flow. The recreational value of rivers is immense, both in economic terms. River-based tourism and recreation generate billions of dollars each year, and in less quantifiable but equally important terms of human well-being, mental health, and spiritual renewal. There is something deeply restorative about spending time near a river. The sound of flowing water, the sight of sunlight on the surface, the cool breeze that rises from the current on a hot day, these sensory experiences have a calming, centering effect on the human mind. Scientific research has confirmed what people have intuitively known for centuries. Exposure to natural water environments reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, improves mood, and enhances cognitive function. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, has a riverine counterpart in the simple act of sitting beside a stream and allowing the rhythm of the water to quiet the mind. Fly fishing, one of the oldest and most contemplative forms of recreation, is intimately connected to rivers. The practice of casting an artificial fly on the surface of a river to entice a trout or salmon to strike requires skill, patience, and a deep understanding of the river's ecology, the insects that hatch from the water, the currents that carry them downstream, the feeding habits of the fish that lie in wait below the surface. Fly fishing is not merely a sport. It is, for many practitioners, a form of meditation, a way of engaging with the natural world that requires presence, attention, and respect for the river and the creatures that inhabit it. Whitewater rafting and kayaking offer a very different kind of river experience, one that is more about adrenaline and adventure than contemplation and calm. Rivers with steep gradients and rocky channels create rapids, stretches of fast, turbulent water that challenge even the most experienced paddlers. The classification of rapids on a scale from Class I, easy, gentle current, to Class VI, extremely dangerous, nearly impossible to navigate, provides a standardized way of assessing the difficulty and risk of a particular stretch of river. Rivers like the Zambezi below Victoria Falls, the Futaleufú in Chile, the Kali Gandaki in Nepal, and the Nos in Italy are world-renowned for their whitewater rapids, attracting adventurous paddlers from around the globe. But rivers do not have to be wild or exotic to provide recreational value. A quiet stretch of river flowing through a rural landscape, a tree-lined stream in a suburban park, a canal path in an old industrial city, all of these offer opportunities for walking, cycling, birdwatching, and quiet reflection. The value of rivers as public amenities, as green corridors through urban landscapes, and as spaces for community gathering and recreation is increasingly recognized by city planners and policymakers, and the restoration and revitalization of urban rivers has become a major trend in city design around the world. The Chingyecheon River in Seoul, South Korea, is one of the most celebrated examples of urban river restoration. In the 1960s, the river was buried beneath a concrete highway as part of the city's rapid industrialization and modernization. For decades, the river flowed unseen beneath the pavement, its water polluted and its channel choked with debris. In 2003, the city government made the bold decision to tear down the highway and restore the river, creating a linear park that runs through the heart of the city. The restored Chingyecheon has become one of the most popular public spaces in Seoul, attracting millions of visitors each year and serving as a model for urban river restoration projects around the world. The project demonstrated that restoring a river is not just an environmental act. It is an economic and social investment that can transform a city, improve quality of life, and create lasting value. Let us now explore one of the most fascinating ecological phenomena associated with rivers, the migration of fish. Fish migration is one of the great wonders of the natural world. Many species of fish undertake long and arduous journeys along rivers, traveling between different habitats to feed, grow, and reproduce. These migrations are driven by instinct, guided by a combination of environmental cues, water temperature, day length, flow rate, chemical signals, and they represent some of the most remarkable feats of navigation and endurance in the animal kingdom. Salmon are the most famous migratory fish, and their life cycle is one of the most extraordinary in nature. Salmon are born in freshwater streams, where they hatch from eggs laid in gravel nests. After spending their early life in fresh water, anywhere from a few months to several years, depending on the species, they undergo a remarkable physiological transformation called smoltification, which prepares them for life in the ocean. Their bodies change color, their internal chemistry adjusts to handle salt water, and they develop an urge to migrate downstream to the sea. Once in the ocean, salmon may travel thousands of kilometers, feeding and growing for 1 to several years before the urge to reproduce draws them back to the river where they were born. How salmon find their way back to their natal stream is one of the most intensely studied questions in animal behavior. Research has shown that salmon use a combination of magnetic field detection, celestial navigation, and olfactory memory, literally the smell of their home stream, to navigate across vast stretches of ocean and pinpoint the exact river, the exact tributary, the exact stretch of gravel where they were born. The precision of this navigation is astonishing, and it speaks to the power of evolutionary adaptation to produce behaviors of extraordinary complexity and reliability. The upstream migration of adult salmon is one of the most dramatic spectacles in nature. The fish fight their way against the current, leaping over waterfalls, navigating rapids, and battling exhaustion and injury. They do not eat during their upstream migration. Their bodies are fueled entirely by the fat reserves they accumulated during their years at sea. By the time they reach their spawning grounds, they are often battered, scarred, and near death. They spawn and then they die, their bodies decomposing in the stream and releasing nutrients that enrich the entire ecosystem. Eels undertake a migration that is, in some ways, even more extraordinary than that of salmon, and in the opposite direction. European eels and their close relatives, the Japanese eels, are born in the open ocean, in areas far from any continent. The European eel spawns in the Sargasso Sea, a region of the North Atlantic Ocean defined by 4 ocean currents. The tiny, transparent larvae, called leptosphaly, drift on ocean currents for up to 3 years before reaching the rivers and estuaries of Europe and North Africa. There they transform into glass eels, then elvers, and finally yellow eels, spending years, sometimes decades, growing and feeding in freshwater rivers and lakes. When they reach sexual maturity, they undergo another transformation, developing silvery coloring, larger eyes adapted for deep-sea vision, and changes in their digestive system that allow them to survive the long journey back to the Sargasso Sea, where they will spawn and die. The eel's life cycle is one of the most mysterious in the animal kingdom. Despite centuries of study, no one has ever observed European eels spawning in the wild. The exact location and depth of the spawning grounds in the Sargasso Sea remain unknown. The mechanisms by which eels navigate across thousands of kilometers of open ocean are still poorly understood, and the European eel population has declined dramatically in recent decades, by as much as 95% in some estimates, due to overfishing, habitat loss, pollution, parasites, and barriers to migration such as dams and weirs. The European eel is now classified as critically endangered, and its continued survival is far from assured. The story of the eel is a powerful illustration of the interconnectedness of river and ocean ecosystems and of the vulnerability of migratory species to the cumulative impacts of human activity. When we dam a river, we do not just affect the fish in the river. We may be disrupting a migratory cycle that spans entire ocean basins and connects ecosystems separated by thousands of kilometers. Let us now discuss a topic that connects rivers to the history of human industry and commerce: gold. The relationship between rivers and gold is ancient and intimate. Gold, being dense and resistant to corrosion, accumulates in river sediments through a process known as placer deposition. As rivers erode gold-bearing rock, the gold particles, being much heavier than the surrounding sand and gravel, settle to the bottom of the riverbed, concentrating in pockets and deposits that can be recovered by panning, sluicing, or dredging. Gold panning is one of the oldest methods of mineral extraction. The technique is simple. A pan is filled with river sediment, and water is used to wash away the lighter material, leaving the heavier gold particles behind. This method has been used for thousands of years, from the rivers of ancient Lydia, where, according to legend, King Midas turned everything he touched to gold, and where the first gold coins were minted in the 7th century BC, to the rivers of West Africa, where alluvial gold mining has been practiced for centuries and was the source of much of the gold that fueled the trans-Saharan trade. The great gold rushes of the 19th century were driven by the discovery of alluvial gold in rivers. The California Gold Rush of 1848, the Australian gold rushes of the 1850s, the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896, each of these events was triggered by the discovery of gold in river sediments and drew hundreds of thousands of prospectors who waded into rivers and streams, panning for the precious metal that could make them rich. The environmental consequences of gold mining in rivers have been severe. Hydraulic mining, a technique developed during the California Gold Rush, involved blasting hillsides with high-pressure jets of water to wash gold-bearing sediment into sluices. The technique was extraordinarily effective at extracting gold, but it also destroyed entire hillsides, filled rivers with sediment, and caused devastating floods downstream. The sediment washed into rivers by hydraulic mining choked fish-spawning habitat, buried agricultural land, and raised riverbed levels, increasing the risk of flooding. The practice was eventually banned, but the scars it left on the landscape are still visible today. Mercury, which was used extensively in gold mining to amalgamate fine gold particles, contaminated rivers and soils across gold mining regions, and the legacy of mercury pollution continues to affect water quality and human health in many areas. Artisanal gold mining using mercury remains widespread in developing countries, particularly in parts of South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, and it is one of the largest sources of mercury pollution in the world. Let us explore another dimension of rivers, their role as habitat for some of the most remarkable and unusual creatures on Earth. The platypus, one of only 5 surviving species of monotremes, egg-laying mammals, is found exclusively in rivers and streams of eastern Australia. The platypus is an animal so strange that when European scientists first encountered it in the late 18th century, they thought it was a hoax, a composite creature stitched together from parts of different animals. It has the bill of a duck, the tail of a beaver, the feet of an otter, and venomous spurs on its hind legs. It lays eggs, nurses its young with milk, and hunts for invertebrates on the riverbed using electroreception, the ability to detect the weak electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of its prey. The platypus is a living link to a time when mammals were just beginning to diversify, and its survival depends on the health of the freshwater rivers and streams where it lives. The pink river dolphin of the Amazon, also known as the bodo, is another extraordinary river creature. It is the largest species of river dolphin, growing up to 2.5 meters in length, and it is distinguished by its pink coloration, which becomes more vivid as the animal ages. The bodo is highly adapted to life in the murky, obstacle-filled waters of the Amazon floodplain, with a flexible neck that allows it to turn its head in all directions, small eyes adapted for the low-visibility environment, and a sophisticated echolocation system that allows it to navigate and find prey in the dark, sediment-laden water. In South American folklore, the bodo is a shape-shifter, a supernatural being that can take human form and seduce unsuspecting villagers. These legends reflect the deep cultural significance of the river dolphin in Amazonian communities, and they have historically provided a degree of protection for the species, as many people were reluctant to harm an animal that might be something more than it appeared. Unfortunately, the bodo is now classified as endangered, threatened by habitat loss, pollution, dam construction, and deliberate killing by fishermen who view the dolphins as competitors for fish. The Ganges River dolphin, found in the rivers of the Indian subcontinent, is another critically endangered species. Also known as the susu, this dolphin is essentially blind. Its eyes have degenerated to the point where they can only detect light and dark, not form images. The susu navigates and hunts entirely by echolocation, emitting clicks and listening for the echoes that bounce off objects in the water. The species has declined dramatically due to habitat fragmentation caused by dams and barrages, pollution, and accidental capture in fishing nets. Fewer than 2,000 individuals are estimated to survive, making the Ganges River dolphin one of the rarest mammals on Earth. The giant freshwater stingray of Southeast Asia is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, with individuals reaching over 4 meters in length and weighing over 600 kilograms. Found in rivers in Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia, the giant stingray is a bottom-dwelling predator that feeds on fish, clams, and crabs. It is poorly studied and rarely seen, and its conservation status is uncertain. Recent catches in the Mekong River have produced some of the largest freshwater fish ever recorded, but the species faces threats from habitat degradation, overfishing, and the construction of dams that fragment its habitat. The Mekong River is, in fact, one of the most important rivers in the world for freshwater biodiversity. It supports the largest inland fishery on Earth, producing an estimated 2 to 3 million tons of fish per year and providing food and livelihoods for over 60 million people. The Mekong is home to over 1,200 species of fish, including the giant Mekong catfish, which can grow to nearly 3 meters in length and weigh over 300 kilograms, and the Mekong giant stingray. But the river's biodiversity is under severe threat from the construction of dams on the main stem and tributaries, which block fish migration, alter flow regimes, and trap the sediment that sustains the river's ecological productivity. The Tonle Sap, a large lake in Cambodia connected to the Mekong by the Tonle Sap River, is one of the most extraordinary hydrological features on Earth. During the dry season, the Tonle Sap River flows from the lake into the Mekong, draining the lake and reducing its area. But during the wet season, when the Mekong swells with monsoon rains and snowmelt from the Tibetan Plateau, the flow of the Tonle Sap River reverses, and water from the Mekong flows back up the river into the lake, expanding its area from approximately 2,500 square kilometers to over 15,000 square kilometers, a six-fold increase. This annual flood pulse is the engine that drives the extraordinary productivity of the Tonle Sap fishery, one of the most productive freshwater fisheries in the world. The reversal of the Tonle Sap River is a vivid demonstration of the dynamic, responsive nature of river systems, and of the intimate connections between rivers, lakes, and the broader hydrological landscape. Let us now consider the role of rivers in shaping the distribution of human populations. It is no coincidence that the world's largest and most important cities are located on rivers. London on the Thames, Paris on the Seine, Cairo on the Nile, Shanghai on the Yangtze, Kolkata on the Hooghly, Baghdad on the Tigris, Vienna on the Danube, Budapest on the Danube, Rome on the Tiber, Moscow on the Moskva, the list goes on and on. Rivers provided the water, the transportation, the food, and the defensive advantages that made urban life possible, and the cities that grew up along their banks have shaped the course of history. The siting of cities on rivers has also made them vulnerable to the river's destructive potential. Floods, as we have discussed, are a constant threat to cities built on floodplains. But cities have also been threatened by the opposite problem, the drying up of the rivers that sustain them. As water demands increase and climates change, some of the world's great rivers are running dry before they reach the sea. The Colorado River, which once carved the Grand Canyon and sustained the lush wetlands of its delta on the Gulf of California, now rarely reaches the ocean. Its water is almost entirely consumed by agriculture, cities, and industry along its course, and the once thriving delta ecosystem has been reduced to a fraction of its former extent. The Yellow River in China has also suffered from over-extraction. In the 1970s, the river began to run dry in its lower reaches for extended periods, a phenomenon that would have been unthinkable in earlier centuries. The diversion of water for irrigation and industry upstream left insufficient flow to maintain the river's course to the sea, with serious consequences for the ecosystems and communities that depended on the river's lower reaches. The Chinese government has since implemented water management measures that have restored flow to the lower Yellow River, but the underlying tension between water supply and water demand remains. The Aral Sea, once the fourth largest lake in the world, is perhaps the most dramatic example of what happens when rivers are diverted beyond their capacity to sustain the ecosystems they feed. The Aral Sea was fed by two rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya, which flow through Central Asia. Beginning in the 1960s, the Soviet government diverted vast quantities of water from these rivers to irrigate cotton fields in the arid steppes of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. The result was catastrophic. The Aral Sea began to shrink, losing more than 90% of its surface area by the early 21st century. The The fishing industry that had sustained local communities collapsed. The exposed lakebed became a source of toxic dust, laced with salt, pesticides, and heavy metals that was carried by the wind across the region, causing respiratory illness and other health problems. The loss of the Aral Sea is one of the most devastating environmental disasters of the 20th century, and it serves as a stark warning of the consequences of treating rivers as inexhaustible resources. Let us now explore the concept of river restoration in more depth, because it is here that we find some of the most hopeful stories in the modern relationship between humans and rivers. River restoration is the process of returning a degraded river to a more natural condition, restoring its ecological health, its physical integrity, and its ability to provide the full range of services that healthy rivers provide: clean water, flood protection, habitat for wildlife, recreational opportunities, and aesthetic beauty. The Kissimmee River in Florida, a waterway that flows through the heart of the southeastern landscape, is one of the most ambitious river restoration projects ever undertaken. In the 1960s, the river was channelized, its natural meandering course replaced by a straight, deep canal designed to facilitate flood control and land drainage. The channelization destroyed over 30,000 acres of floodplain wetlands, eliminated habitat for fish and wildlife, and degraded water quality. Beginning in the 1990s, a massive restoration project was initiated to restore the river's natural flow, reconnect it with its floodplain, and rebuild the wetland habitats that had been destroyed. The project involved filling in sections of the canal, removing levees, and allowing the river to reclaim its original, winding course. The results have been dramatic. Wetland vegetation has returned, bird populations have rebounded, fish communities have diversified, and water quality has improved. The restoration of the Elwha River on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State is another remarkable success story. Two dams, the Elwha Dam, built in 1913, and the Glines Canyon Dam, built in 1927, blocked the river for nearly a century, preventing salmon from reaching over 110 kilometers of spawning habitat upstream. In 2011 and 2014, the dams were removed in what was then the largest dam removal project in history. The results were immediate and spectacular. Within weeks of the dam's removal, salmon began swimming upstream into habitat they had not accessed for generations. Sediment that had been trapped behind the dams was released downstream, rebuilding the river's estuary and restoring the natural processes that sustain the coastal ecosystem. The Elwha restoration demonstrated that even decades of damage can be reversed when the river is given the chance to heal. These success stories are being replicated around the world. In Europe, the European Union's Water Framework Directive, adopted in the year 2000, established ambitious goals for the ecological restoration of rivers across the continent. Thousands of projects have been initiated under this directive, from the removal of obsolete dams and weirs to the restoration of riparian vegetation, the reconnection of floodplains, and the reduction of pollution inputs. Progress has been uneven. Many rivers remain far from meeting the directive's goals, but the direction of travel is clear. There is a growing recognition that healthy rivers are not luxuries but necessities, and that investing in river restoration pays dividends in terms of water security, flood protection, biodiversity conservation, and human well-being. In Japan, the concept of sato-nami, a term that can be loosely translated as village waves, or the harmonious relationship between communities and their local waterways, has influenced river management philosophy for generations. Japanese river management has traditionally emphasized living with the river rather than trying to conquer it, and this philosophy is reflected in the design of flood management systems that accommodate natural flooding rather than trying to prevent it entirely. While Japan has also built large dams and concrete-lined river channels, particularly during the rapid industrialization of the 20th century, there is a growing movement to restore more natural river conditions, remove unnecessary concrete, and allow rivers to reclaim some of the space that was taken from them. Let us now turn to a topic that connects rivers to the very foundation of modern economic life: hydroelectric power. Hydroelectric power, the generation of electricity from the energy of flowing water, is one of the oldest and most widely used forms of renewable energy. The basic principle is simple. Water flowing through a turbine spins a generator, producing electricity. The amount of power generated depends on the volume of water and the height through which it falls. The greater the volume and the greater the drop, the more power is produced. Hydroelectric power currently provides approximately 16% of the world's electricity and over 60% of all renewable electricity. It is the dominant source of electricity in many countries, including Norway, Brazil, Canada, and several nations in Central Africa and South America. Large hydroelectric dams, such as the Three Gorges Dam in China, the Itaipu Dam on the border of Brazil and Paraguay, and the Guri Dam in Venezuela, are among the most productive power stations in the world. The Itaipu Dam is a binational project shared by Brazil and Paraguay, and it was for many years the largest hydroelectric power station in the world until it was surpassed by the Three Gorges Dam. Itaipu generates over 14,000 megawatts of electricity, providing approximately 75% of Paraguay's electricity and 15% of Brazil's. The dam is a monument to international cooperation and engineering achievement, but like all large dams, it came at a significant environmental and social cost. The construction of the dam required the flooding of a vast area of forest and farmland, the displacement of thousands of families, and the destruction of the spectacular Guaira Falls, once one of the world's largest waterfalls by volume. The environmental costs of large hydroelectric dams are increasingly being weighed against their benefits. While hydroelectric power is often described as clean energy because it does not directly produce greenhouse gas emissions, the reservoirs behind large dams can be significant sources of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, particularly in tropical regions where submerged vegetation decomposes in the warm, oxygen-poor water at the bottom of the reservoir. The disruption of river ecosystems, the displacement of communities, the loss of biodiversity, and the alteration of sediment and nutrient flows are all significant concerns that must be balanced against the benefits of electricity generation and flood control. Small-scale and run-of-river hydroelectric installations offer a less impactful alternative to large dams. These systems generate electricity from the natural flow of the river without the need for large reservoirs, minimizing the environmental footprint while still providing a reliable source of renewable energy. The development of small-scale hydro is being encouraged in many countries as part of a broader strategy to diversify energy sources, reduce dependence on fossil fuels, and minimize the environmental impact of electricity generation. Now let us speak about something that may surprise you: rivers of ice. Glaciers are, in a very real sense, rivers of ice. They form in areas where more snow falls in winter than melts in summer, allowing layers of snow to accumulate, compact, and eventually transform into ice. Under the influence of gravity, this ice begins to flow slowly, almost imperceptibly, but inexorably, downhill, carving valleys, polishing rock, and transporting sediment. The rate of flow varies from a few centimeters per day to several meters per day, depending on the thickness of the ice, the slope of the terrain, and the temperature. Glacial rivers, the meltwater streams that emerge from the snouts of glaciers, are among the most dynamic and dramatic river systems on Earth. They carry enormous loads of fine sediment called glacial flour, which gives the water a milky, opaque appearance and a distinctive pale blue or gray color. This sediment is the product of the glacier grinding the bedrock beneath it into fine powder, and it is carried downstream by the meltwater, depositing layers of fertile soil across the valley floor. Glacial rivers are highly variable, their flow fluctuating dramatically with the seasons and even with the time of day. On a warm summer afternoon, when the sun is melting the glacier's surface at maximum rate, the meltwater stream may be a roaring torrent. By early morning, when temperatures are lowest and melting slows, the stream may be reduced to a trickle. This daily fluctuation makes glacial rivers unpredictable and potentially dangerous, as hikers and travelers who cross a shallow stream in the morning may find it impassable by afternoon. The retreat of glaciers due to climate change is having profound effects on glacial rivers and the communities that depend on them. As glaciers shrink, the rivers they feed may initially increase in flow as the rate of melting accelerates. But as the glaciers continue to diminish, the long-term trend is toward reduced flow, particularly during the dry season when glacial meltwater is the primary source of river flow. In the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, and other mountain ranges around the world, communities that have relied on glacial rivers for centuries are facing an uncertain future as the glaciers that sustain their water supplies disappear. Let us reflect for a moment on the sheer scale of the world's river systems. There are an estimated 165 major river basins on Earth, draining virtually every square kilometer of the planet's land surface. The total length of the world's rivers is estimated at several million kilometers, a number so large that it is difficult to visualize. If you could lay all the world's rivers end to end, they would stretch from the earth to the sun and back many times over. These rivers range in size from the mighty Amazon, with its discharge of over 200,000 cubic meters per second, to tiny, unnamed creeks that flow for only a few meters before merging with a larger stream. Every one of these waterways, no matter how small, plays a role in the larger hydrological system, carrying water from the land to the sea, transporting sediment and nutrients, providing habitat for organisms, and shaping the landscape through which it flows. The concept of a watershed, the area of land that drains into a particular river, is fundamental to understanding how rivers function and how they are connected to the landscape. Every point on the Earth's land surface belongs to a watershed. Rain that falls on a hilltop may flow into one of several rivers, depending on which side of the hill it lands on. The boundaries between watersheds, the ridgelines and divides that separate one drainage basin from another, are as significant in hydrological terms as the rivers themselves. These boundaries determine which river receives the water, which ocean it ultimately reaches, and which communities and ecosystems benefit from its flow. Watershed management, the practice of managing land and water resources at the scale of the entire drainage basin, rather than focusing on individual sections of the river, is now widely recognized as the most effective approach to protecting river health. Because everything that happens on the land within a watershed affects the river, managing the river without managing the watershed is futile. Deforestation in the headwaters can increase erosion and sedimentation downstream. Industrial pollution in one tributary can contaminate the entire river. Agricultural runoff in one part of the basin can cause algal blooms and oxygen depletion hundreds of kilometers away. Effective watershed management requires cooperation and coordination among all the stakeholders within the basin: farmers, cities, industries, conservation organizations, and government agencies. It requires an understanding of the complex interactions between land use, water quality, hydrology, and ecology, and it requires a willingness to make difficult trade-offs, balancing the competing demands of economic development, environmental protection, and social equity. Let us close this documentary with a meditation on the meaning of rivers, what they represent, what they teach us, and why they matter so deeply to the human spirit. Rivers are metaphors for life itself. They are born in high, remote places. They gather strength as they flow. They encounter obstacles and find ways around them. They nourish everything they touch. They are constantly moving, constantly changing, never the same from one moment to the next. And ultimately they reach the sea, the vast, undifferentiated ocean from which all water came and to which all water returns. Every human culture that has lived near a river has recognized this metaphorical power. Rivers appear in the myths, the religions, the philosophies, and the art of every civilization. They are symbols of time, of change, of purification, of death and rebirth. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, as we mentioned in Part 1, saw in the river a fundamental truth about the nature of reality. Everything flows, nothing is permanent, the only constant is change. The Buddhist tradition uses the image of a river to describe the nature of the self, a continuous flow of changing sensations, thoughts, and experiences that gives the illusion of a fixed, permanent identity. The self, like a river, is not a thing but a process, a pattern of movement that persists even as the substance that composes it is constantly being replaced. In the African tradition of many river-dwelling peoples, the river is not merely a physical entity. It is a social being, a member of the community, with its own rights, its own personality, and its own demands. The river must be respected, honored, and cared for, because the well-being of the community depends on the well-being of the river. This understanding, rooted in millennia of lived experience and observation, aligns remarkably well with the insights of modern ecology, which recognizes that the health of human communities is inseparable from the health of the ecosystems that sustain them. Rivers teach us humility. No matter how clever our engineering, no matter how sophisticated our technology, we cannot fully control a river. We can dam it, divert it, channelize it, and pollute it, but we cannot stop it from flowing. Water will find a way, it always does. The river is patient, it operates on timescales that dwarf human lifetimes, and it will outlast every structure we build to contain it. Rivers teach us interconnectedness. A river is not an isolated entity. It is connected to the rain that falls on distant mountains, to the underground aquifers that feed its springs, to the ocean that receives its flow, to the forests that line its banks, to the fish that swim in its currents, to the birds that nest in its floodplain, and to the billions of human beings who drink its water, eat its fish, irrigate their fields with its flow, and depend on it for their survival. To damage a river is to damage all of these connections. To heal a river is to heal a web of relationships that extends across the entire landscape. Rivers teach us the value of patience and persistence. A river does not carve a canyon in a day or a year or a century. It takes millions of years of slow, steady erosion, drop by drop, grain by grain, to produce the awe-inspiring landscapes that rivers create. The lesson is clear: great things are accomplished not by sudden dramatic action, but by consistent, sustained effort over long periods of time. And rivers teach us the importance of letting go. The water that flows past us in this moment will never return. It is gone, carried downstream to the sea, evaporated into the sky, fallen as rain on some distant landscape. We cannot hold on to it. We can only appreciate it as it passes, knowing that the river will continue to flow, bringing new water, new life, new possibilities. The rivers of the world are facing their greatest challenges. Climate change, pollution, over-extraction, habitat destruction, and the relentless pressure of a growing human population are pushing river ecosystems to the breaking point. But rivers are resilient. They have survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and continental collisions. They have been flowing for billions of years, and they will continue to flow long after the current crisis has passed. The question is not whether rivers will survive. They will. The question is what kind of rivers we will leave to future generations. Will they be healthy, vibrant, life-sustaining waterways, teeming with fish and birds and the full richness of aquatic life? Or will they be degraded, polluted, lifeless channels, monuments to our failure to steward the most precious resource on Earth? The answer depends on the choices we make as individuals, as communities, as nations, and as a species. It depends on whether we choose to see rivers as resources to be exploited or as living systems to be respected. It depends on whether we invest in protection and restoration or continue down the path of degradation and neglect. It depends on whether we have the wisdom to learn from the mistakes of the past and the courage to build a better future. The river is waiting. It has been waiting for a very long time. It will wait a little longer, but not forever. This has been the story of the river, a story of water and stone, of life and death, of creation and destruction, of human ambition and natural power. It is a story that began billions of years ago, when the first rain fell on the first rock and the first trickle of water found its way downhill. It is a story that continues today in every stream and creek, every mighty river and hidden underground channel, every delta and estuary and floodplain on the face of the earth. And it is a story that will continue long after we are gone, as long as water flows downhill, as long as rain falls from the sky, as long as the sun shines and the earth turns and gravity pulls the waters of the world toward the sea.